board members and staff. So Todd Bryan, DAB.
Rory Billows-Yurkovich, DAB.
Brendan, you're muted.
Brendan Ash, DAB.
Matthew Schecksteiner, DAB.
Okay. Mark?
Mark McIntyre, Planning Board Liaison.
Okay. And staff people?
I'm Shannon Noller with the City of Boulder Planning Department.
Okay, great.
I'm Kalani Paho. I'm the DAB Board Liaison with the Planning Department, and Charles Sparrow will be joining us around.
Okay.
I'm Amanda Cussworth. I'm with Planning and Development Services also.
And I am Devin Saunders with Planning and Development Services and the Board Specialist for the Design Advisory Board.
Okay, great. And we'll introduce the applicant in a second or two, but we want to start off with kind of the rules of decorum before we get into the approval of the minutes and then get into the public participation. And I'll kind of walk people through the agenda. So if Devin could start us off with the rules of decorum or engagement.
All righty, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be sharing my screen here and going over a few slides with you all to go ahead and talk about the rules of decorum for tonight's public meeting. Maybe if I can pull it up here. There we go. Alrighty, y'all. Again, my name is Devin Saunders, Board Specialist here for the Design Advisory Board. There is one item for public discussion tonight, and so I'll be going over the rules of decorum for this public meeting. The city has engaged with the community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as the democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. When it comes to public comment, there are a couple ways in which you can do this. There was no pre-sign up form, so when it comes to that time, we'll go ahead and use the raise hand function on Zoom. You can go ahead and hover your mouse over where it says raise hand, and that will raise your hand and let me know that you have something to say. Otherwise, there are a few shortcuts listed right here. If you're calling in on your phone, I did see that we have one person coming in from their phone. So during public comment, if you'd like to speak, you can click *9, and that will promptly raise your hand. Also, there is the option Y for Mac or Alt Y for PC. All these options will raise your hand for public comment. Additionally, there is another way where you can go hover over the reactions if you're on the actual online form, and under reactions, you can raise your hand that way. And with that, I will turn that back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. So we have I think the first thing we want to do is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was on September the 14th. And so could I have a motion to approve those minutes from a DAB member?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Any changes in the minutes that were sent out to us with our packet of information for today's meeting?
There were a couple set of edits that were submitted, and they are reflected in the packet for today.
Okay. All right. So can we go ahead and approve the minutes then? We have a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Okay. Oh, we have approved the minutes then from our September 14th meeting. So the next item on the agenda is public participation that's unrelated to the project that's being reviewed. So we have about, it looks like we have 20 or more attendees. I'm assuming that all of the attendees who are members of the public would probably like to comment on the project. So there will be a place in the discussion of the project for those public comments. So does anyone want to comment on anything that's not part of this application? Please hold up your hand. Or raise your hand. No one, Devin?
I am seeing no hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we will come back to the second public participation part in the discussion of the project. So we now have a project before us that's the renovation of the 1345 28th Street. It's a relatively large project. We're going to try to answer a few questions that the City Council has asked the Design Advisory Board to address. We're going to try to focus mostly on those questions, but we will have time after those questions are answered to come back to some other design elements that that Design Advisory Board members may be interested in. So what I'd like to do to sort of kick off the project description is to ask Shannon Moeller if she can give us kind of an overview.
Great. Let's see. So I am ready with a quick presentation. I'll just need my screen sharing enabled, it looks like. Settings. There we go. Perfect. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So good afternoon, board. I'm Shannon Moeller, the case manager for this project as part of the development review planning staff for the City of Boulder. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview of the project before handing it off to the applicant. So today the board will be reviewing and providing recommendations on the design of a proposed redevelopment project at 1345 28th Street. This is the current Millennium Harvest House Hotel, and it's located just west of 28th, south of Arapahoe, and very close to the University of Colorado main campus across Folsom. Boulder Creek runs through the southern portion of the site. It's about 15 acres, and it's located within the Boulder Valley Regional Center. So here you can see the existing and proposed images of the site. It contains the entire property that's outlined in red. So it spans the north and south areas of the creek. As mentioned, it currently contains the hotel, which has been approved for demolition. There are multiple tennis courts that are proposed to be removed as part of the reworking of the open space around the creek. There's an existing fish observatory just north of the creek that's proposed to remain. There are 3 cottages used for non-residential purposes south of the creek, of which 2 are proposed to remain. This proposal is being reviewed through the site and use review process. The proposed new structures would include 3 4-story buildings that are about 54 feet in height, and they would have 303 apartments. These are geared toward the city's university student population. The site is eligible to request the proposed height through the site review process, where the city's community benefit standards require an increase in inclusionary housing requirements if it is approved through the site review process. The site plan also includes a new public right-of-way at the north end of the site, which is to be known as Olson Drive. And it will also include various updates to multi-use paths through the site and to the open space around the creek. In terms of the review process we're in, the proposal previously was discussed by the planning board in 2021 through the concept plan process. And when the concept plan went to City Council for call-up consideration, the council referred the proposal to the Design Advisory Board as part of the site review process that we're in now to provide some general feedback on the design. So that is a process that the board's commenting under, and the relevant guidelines are those in the site review criteria, as well as the BVRC design guidelines that are specific to projects in this area. Lastly, in terms of this review, it's important to note that the overall proposal is significantly impacted by floodplain, high hazard, and conveyance zones from Boulder Creek. So these are constraints on the placement of buildings and changes to parking. And they require the buildings to be outside of the high hazard zone and for the lowest floor to be elevated to at or above the flood protection elevation. I'm just going to touch really briefly on the key issues staff identified for the board's feedback. First, we'd like feedback on the relationship of the buildings to streets and public access ways and recommendations, in particular regarding the north elevations of the buildings facing Olson Drive. Next, we'd like the board to comment and provide recommendations on circulation patterns and wayfinding, in particular as it plays into the accessible circulation routes and location of building entries. Third, we'd like the board to review options to address softening the exposed podium, recognizing that the building elevations need to be elevated to allow the lowest floor to be at or above the flood protection elevation. And lastly, we'd like the board to review the buffer space around the ground floor units that face onto parking areas at either end of the site and provide any recommendations that could improve privacy and livability at the ground floor. So that was just a really quick overview, and we'll touch on those again as the discussion goes on. And I just wanted to briefly pass it over to Kalani before the applicant does their presentation for her to just touch on the review being done by DAB tonight.
Hi, so as the board may recall, a couple months ago, we had talked a little bit about how to streamline some of the meetings. And as you'll notice from the packet, we had identified like the top 3 to 4 items that the board can address related to site review criteria or any other guidelines that may apply to a project. So that's the structure of the memo that you saw in the packet, where the kind of high priority items from staff to meet site review or the BVRC guidelines. That said, if there are other items that the board sees that they would like to address during the meeting, please do so. But we did want to identify the top 3. So that's what we have for you tonight.
Yep, and that concludes the quick staff overview. And I think that the applicant has a detailed presentation as well.
Okay, let me ask more of a procedural question here just for practicality. Does it make more sense to have the applicant's presentation and then the public participation after they've heard that presentation? Okay,
Yes.
let's do that then. Okay. So go ahead whenever you guys are ready.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll introduce myself and the team members that are going to be speaking tonight. So I'm Kevin Hieronymus. I'm a principal of SAR Architects in Denver. We have a long history of working in Boulder and are happy to be working on this site again. It's a great site and a really excellent client, and we're pleased to be talking to you about it today. Amy McCann from our office will also be presenting from SAR, and then Kaylin with Wank Associates is our landscape architect in the project, and she'll be presenting as well. And thank you, Shannon and Kalani, for the prep and the comments. I think we'll touch on the 4 main areas of concern sort of throughout the presentation, rather than as a concerted effort. So familiarity with the site. Thank you. I think we moved past a fair deal of the context. The uses on site, we have had quite lengthy discussions with RMTC about the viability of the tennis courts and what can be worked out through the site. The underlying thing behind a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with the floodplain. So we have the 16-acre site And there's, I forget the number, 4 acres of it on which we can actually build something. And that adds a lot of constraints. So there's geometric constraints to the realities of parking, building dimensions, fitting the program that's desired, keeping adequate space between buildings for fire separation distance, and also just making these comfortable spaces between the long wings of the building that you see. And so that little blue area is what we've got to work with. And that's a primary driver in the mass, as you'll see in some of the diagrams that we've got coming up. That just explains how we approach the site, why it is the way it is, why the plan configuration is derived as it's shown. And really it's the externalities, it's lifting this building up out of the floodplain. It's connectivity from the transportation master plan. And if we look on the top left diagram, that might be an original concept that would meet the client's program in a kind of a traditional way, maybe a little bit wider courtyards, deeper, and circular in nature. What this site affords us, of course, with this great connection to the Boulder Creek path and everything through there, is a real desire to open that up. And as we open up the mass, instead of these series of very insular donuts, if you will, that gives us both the opportunity to engage with the creek, and that's really what's driving the form of this. And then that arc is in response to both the creek and the high hazard zone. And diagram 4 there on the top right, you can understand how we're beginning to recognize these are large buildings, and we want to be sensitive to that. So all of our massing scales down to the creek. It's really, we have 3 4-sided buildings to design in this scenario. Maybe we're choosing favorites a little bit with the south elevation, but we feel like that's appropriate in terms of scale. And then recognizing that they are quite large buildings, just where do we break those up? How do we incorporate the circulation through the site so that it's both engaging to the public for use to the shopping area to the north, and for the students that are living here for connectivity to the path to the south. And then looking at that from a courtyard point of view and landscaping, I don't think we touched on this, but one of the reasons we have not come to DAB sooner is there was a lot of discussion with city forestry and with Chris in landscaping about the status of the trees on the site, what could be salvaged, what would be impacted by this change in elevation. And the net result is there are a lot of trees that will be removed, but there's a much greater number that will be replaced. I think we can go to the next one. Another characteristic of the site that anybody who's ridden that path will know is that it's sloping from west to east, right? So there's about 6 to 7 feet of grade change across the site. Which does give us a lot of challenges from a topography, grading, accessibility point of view. And that's one of the comments that we'll talk about from the staff comments. This was an earlier massing model that's sitting over there in our office. We wish we could be there in person for you to look at it. It's still quite relevant in terms of illustrating the scheme, in that we do have these wings of the building that are coming out. The mass is broken up as it approaches the creek, and that's also scaled down in stories.
And so to touch on the circulation of the project, this diagram kind of clearly shows in the pink dotted line sort of the primary circulation. So what the project does is peel the Boulder Creek path away from the edge of Boulder Creek to create a better experience for trail users and a safer experience. The other sort of primary route of circulation through the site is this north-south multi-use path connection between buildings 1 and 2, which gets trail users up through the site and connected to the existing shopping center north. Next slide. And so one of the benefits of pulling the creek path away from the edge is actually to create more park space and to create this publicly accessible open lands area, similar to the Civic Center and the park space that has been created along Boulder Creek there as a destination along Boulder Creek. It's part of the project priority to preserve and enhance Boulder Creek for ecological reasons, for habitat and existing mature tree preservation as well. slide. While both sides of the creek are being developed for the project, the proposed structures are occurring on the north side of the creek. So for graphic and conversation purposes, a lot of this context focuses north of the creek. Some of what you're seeing here are the courtyards and spaces between the buildings, which kind of lay out nicely to create these private courtyards that are going to be secured from the south end. And part of what these spaces do is mitigate the grade change that's approximately 5 feet between finished floor and the floodplain elevation. So they give us the room and the space north-south to make up that grade. We acknowledge that we have sort of the same grade challenges on both sides of the site, both east and west facing of the parking lot, where we have a little less space to make up that grade change. So while we acknowledge that that's a pretty tight condition, we're sort of limited in our lateral constraint as far as providing the adequate parking requirements and circulation requirements as well. So we just kind of want to touch and note that we have improved it since concept plan, where initially we showed the sidewalk up against the edge of the building and have now provided a slight buffer and room for vegetation. Next slide.
Thanks, Kaylin. So the project consists of these 3 buildings that range in size. The easternmost building, building 1, is the smallest. It's at 125,000 square feet. The middle building, building 2, is the largest at 165,000 square feet. Across all 3 buildings, there's 303 units. They're a mix of unit types between studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, and then the majority of them are 4-bed units. The amenity spaces are concentrated into building 1, and there's some other miscellaneous study spaces scattered throughout the other buildings as well. Looking at the materiality of the project, we have this east-west bar on the north side of the site that is clad in metal panel that is contrasted to the north-south bars, the fingers, if you will, that are more warm tones. The south ends of each of the fingers we have clad in brick, and the brick we're looking at using a 3-toned ombre effect. So you'd have the darker brick off to the east, transitioning to a lighter brick as you move west and closer to campus. The fingers will also have a continuous insulation system. In the courtyards, we're looking at using a lighter toned continuous insulation system to help diffuse the daylight within those courtyards. And the main building entries will be clad in wood, so that wood material will help communicate the entry points. The unique condition is at the main entry. It's the only opportunity where we have a north-south bar kind of sliding past that east-west metal backbone. And so that special unique condition is at the main entry. So taking a look at some of the building elevations, the south elevation in the middle here, you can start to read the cadence of the solid void language along the south elevation, and the north elevation here you can see is that metal clad backbone with the wood entry. We'll go through some of the elevations, the exterior elevations for each of the buildings. And I do want to note that for these architectural elevations, we're not showing the landscape material, so we'll see those more in the renderings. And then we have a fly-through at the end where we can see those. You can see the metal panel backbone along the Olson Drive, where we'll still have some partially recessed balconies to have some planar relief in that facade, and then that contrasted with the warm tones of those north-south fingers. And as we talked about being in the floodplain, the finished floor elevation is above grade for each of the building, and so we've been intentional and deliberate to make sure that the exterior cladding material is actually pulled down to grade to help conceal that foundation. Looking at some of the renderings for the site, you're able to see more of the relationship of the building as it meets grade and more of the landscaped area. You can start to see the ombre effect of the brick as it transitions along each of the building fingers. We had a request from city staff to add a couple more renderings for discussion, so we can come back to these as needed. The views on the north show the relationship of the building to Olson Drive, and the views on the south are more of the buffer on the east and west of the building. The entry points, as we talked about, are clad in wood, so it's a common language throughout the project. We also have a pretty consistent window fenestration pattern, and the windows at those entry slots are more vertical stacks. The courtyard spaces, they are mostly 42 feet wide with the multi-use path, and then the primary courtyard at building 1 a little wider at 46 feet wide. You can see the continuous insulation finish system that we have in the courtyard, and then you can also see that metal panel backbone at the north end. So now I can jump to the fly through. We can look through that together. So approaching the building on the east side off 28th, kind of turning the corner to the main entry here. So you can see how the main entry is elevated above grade. So we have some landscaped features to help soften that edge. And this is towards the main entry and how the building relates to the multi-use path. So now we're going south down the multi-use path. So more of the amenity spaces on the right, and then a typical apartment entry on the right. So amenity on the left, typical apartments on the right. We have the club room and an outdoor perch on the left here. Kind of turn left and take a peek at the building 1 amenity courtyard to see that relationship with the pool. Now making our way west in more of the landscaped area, you can see the Fish Observatory off to the left and the relationship to the creek. You can see the relationship of the mass void cadence, and the intentional scaling down of the building on the south elevation as the grading steps down towards the creek. This will be a nice lawn for the public. Some wood slat features on the fully projecting balconies along the south side. So you can really see from some of those early diagrams how the form and mass of the building is responding to that kidney shape of the floodplain, which is in direct response to the creek, and using that as an amenity for the site.
And we trying, of course, to be respectful of the time limit requested. So if there's anything else, we're just a little over 10 minutes with the video. So we could talk about this a lot more, frankly. There's so many details and it's such a large project. But we are looking forward to the conversation and your feedback and available to ask. If there's anything specifically you'd like us to address that we didn't cover in that brief presentation, please let us know.
I think we'll get to that in some of the questions. So yeah, this is very informative. So thank you very much for doing that. So we want to move into the public participation phase right now and hear from the public. And Devin, do you want to kind of take that over and kind of describe that process and walk people through it?
Absolutely, happy to. So this part of the meeting is going to be the public comment section. If there are any people on this, any attendees on this call who would like to participate in the public, go ahead and raise your hand with the raise hand function. That will let me know that you are wanting to speak. Each participant will be given 3 minutes to speak their mind on this project. And with that, I will go ahead and open the floor. Please raise your hand if you would like to speak. Seeing none, but I'll give it just a quick second. And Mr. Chair, looks like there are no public participation at this time, so I'll turn that back to you.
Okay. I will officially close the public participation segment then, and then we'll move into, I guess, a kind of a two-part discussion with the DAB board. And the first is to just ask specific questions. Are there specific questions that you have about the presentation that you would like a little more clarity on before we get into the specific issues?
I have one.
Okay, Matthew.
I'm just curious, what phase of the architectural design are you in, along with the civil and landscape design?
Yeah, we're in the second round of site review comments were just submitted recently. So it was, as I mentioned, it was intended that we visit closer to that first review, but the issues with forestry and the fish observatory caused us to continue a little bit long, farther along.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. That probably was mentioned. I couldn't remember which round of site review it was. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Brendan or Rory or Mark?
I don't at this time. I think I have questions, but I think we'll get to them as we get into the review.
Okay. Rory, anything specific?
Nope.
Okay. Mark, yes, you.
The current creek path and its proximity to the creek itself, is the creek path I know it's plowed by the transportation department, but is it actually managed by Parks and Rec or OSMP, or who actually is responsible for, center line of the creek or the creek and the current creek path?
That's an
Charles.
excellent question, Mark. I don't know the answer right off the top of my head, but if you give me a minute, I'll figure it out.
Okay, all right. And this one for the applicant, was it strictly your design to pull the path away from the creek, or was it input from OSMP, Parks and Rec, anyone else within the city that helped you reach that conclusion?
That was specifically our proposed design to really create a better space and a better experience for trail users. But all of city staff has been pretty supportive of that decision, both from a circulation standpoint of trail users and from an open space standpoint. So it stemmed with us, but the city seems to be on board with that.
Okay, that was great. I just wanted to know if it was your kind of a pure design motivation or a nudged design motivation. So that answers my question there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions before we kind of move into the discussion? Okay, then what I would like to do, this is kind of a tradition with DAB, the Design Advisory Board. We try to start off with some positive feedback about sort of first impressions and what we liked about the project or what we like about the project. And then we'll get into some more of the critique of it as we go along, but we generally start there. So do any of you DAB members want to start that off?
Sure, I'll start if no one else prefers to. Yeah, if I can, you know, in terms of just attributes that I think overall organization of the building materials, I tend to like that there's a concept and a logic for where certain materials are applied. I think that's a nice guiding force compared to the alternative where it's just sort of painting different materials at different areas. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about materials or distribution of them, but I think the organization of it is really thoughtful.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Brendan or Rory?
I'll go.
Okay,
So when we first received this packet, I think the first thing that I was concerned about was how the heck are they going to address that massive floodplain? Because it is taking up so much of that site and that area. And while I think tennis players of Boulder will be sad to see those courts go, but I think that it's a nice use of creating some open public space and area for just more interaction with the creek and the multi-use path. And, you know, it takes it away from the just being sort of a narrow corridor pathway to get basically further east or west. I think it creates a nice moment and a good pause after a long underpass of 28th Street. So I do like how the floodplain has been addressed in terms of landscaping.
okay, thanks. Rory?
Yep, I second what Brendan's saying here. I ride this section of the path often, and while paralleling the creek is always a wonderful experience, as you head west, you get that for about 4 miles. So I think this kind of reminds me a bit of Willville East, where kind of the bike path system takes an opportunity to dive into a student housing development. I think in that case, it's actually dorms, but it just adds interest to the path experience, creates a nice node after kind of a major transit, as she mentioned, under Highway 28 or 28th Street and across the bridge. I also really appreciate the just porosity through these buildings that, you know, not only using the floodplain as a form driver and plan locator, but as far as trying to maximize density, but still preserving access to air and light and green space, the kind of finger approach, as well as kind of the stepping down massing, and then ultimately breaking the project down into kind of 3 separate buildings that each take on kind of a bit of uniqueness as far as massing and overall dimension. So it's not just the same module kind of stamped out across the site. So I appreciate those things.
Okay, thanks, Rory. I think what I would say, the kind of my first impression was, for the massive scale of the project, at least in the images that we've looked at so far, it does feel like there is a human scale there. And I think that's a combination of things that we can talk about. But it felt kind of that there was this scale. that made me feel comfortable there, even though it comes in as sort of an institutional scale itself. And so the challenge is really in sort of scaling that down as much as possible. So I think that you guys have done a good job. That's some of the things we want to talk about. So if there are no other comments there, I think what we have these 4 issues that we want to talk about. And I don't know if we want to just take them in the as they're listed here. I think I would prefer to start with the north elevation fronting Olson. And if that's okay with you guys, if we could sort of zoom in on that with the walkthrough that we were just doing. Maybe we can get through that one pretty easily. So the north, the Olson Street kind of corridor there. And I think what we kind of want to see is from more of this, where it intersects with the street. Yeah, I think is that all north facing?
Yeah, this is the north elevation. So this is Olson
north
Street here.
elevation. Okay, all right. So the question here that came up with staff, and correct me if I'm kind of straying into other areas, but it sounds like because of the relationship between Olson Street and this set of buildings and what will eventually be happening across Olson Street on the north, that this feels more like an alleyway treatment. And I don't know if other DAB members perceive it that way. I think that's what we want to talk about. And so the recommendation would be to sort of how to make this more of a, I guess, more of a human scale that has a more attractive interface between the buildings, the road, and then what's across the street from it, what's north of it. So DAB members, do you want to weigh in here at this point?
Yeah, so what is north? Just my memory isn't serving me. What scale of development do we have?
It's basically the back of house for that whole Safeway, Petco
Oh yeah.
strip mall.
Yeah, it's all that.
And then that one kind of multi-use trail connection that kind of splits Safeway.
So it's like a no man's land.
Yeah, it's kind of like the back alley.
Are there any, and forgive me, I'm just not that familiar yet with the access to the building. Looks like there's a lot of access to the buildings from the courtyards, but what are the primary access points on the north of these buildings? Do you actually go into the interstitial space to an entrance?
Correct. Yeah. Basically, the 42 to 46 foot gaps between the buildings are all pedestrian access. And then as you head south, roughly two unit modules, then you're presented with entry.
Is there a detail of that north detached sidewalk and landscaping and for lack of a better word, like the throat into those entryways? Is there a closer scale look at that landscape plan and how the paving and pedestrian circulation is marked?
Kaylin, if you have something.
Where I'm going with this is, I think it might be important to keep in context, not just the facade, but, which there's going to be some areas of facade for 30 or 40 feet that aren't the primary view. But it's the treatment to me of that node around where you enter into that entryway. Like how are those treated, and are they landscaped you know, in a way that that's the kind of visual focal point, and not so much the buildings, the lower end of the facade there.
It may be helpful if you, do you guys have the ability to walk around in that landscape or whatever that model is? Because it's pretty well detailed.
Yes, yeah.
We do, yeah, we can.
Or even just looking at the east elevation of building 3, or just an elevation view.
Yeah.
So here's,
there we go.
and remember, these architectural elevations don't have the landscape shown.
But they are representative of grading, correct? As far as that heavy
Yeah.
line.
Yes.
And that was actually going to be one of my questions is, the grade line seems to be different between section, elevation, 3D. I'm just wondering if that's still being developed, or for example, the grade between the buildings, and then the grade within the, between the fingers.
I think what's happening, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically it appears that the north facade has kind of this flat line grade that we're seeing on the screen. And then once you're in between the buildings, whether you're in a courtyard or just one of the interstitial spaces, there's a lot of landscape development that helps to mitigate grade. So that's where rise and fall of grade is occurring, with a lot of kind of site features, planters and benches and stairs and things of that nature.
I think the architectural sections are more representative of the grade difference between buildings, but don't necessarily represent the exact landscape pathways and walls and things. So the plans in the model are a little bit closer to that. But I would say that as soon as you get beyond the north edge of the buildings, we have to drop back down to the floodplain elevation. So on sort of the approach south from the north side to the buildings, you're down lower and generally raising up higher to get up to the building elevations. And it was thoughtful that between buildings 1 and 2, the multi-use path connection is sort of a wider, broader emphasis, so that it's a little bit clearer that that's the way that people should move through the site. And then the corridor between buildings 2 and 3 was intentionally designed to be a little bit more vegetated, narrower scale. So it's encouraged for people to get off their bikes, walk them through the space, move through the space a little bit slower. It is publicly accessible, but it's trying to feel a little more semi-private in that zone. So trying to really designate the clear public routes through the spaces. So each corridor is kind of treated as its own unique space.
So
Yeah.
that kind of actually just creates a little more of a question. When I'm looking at this section through the whole site, the courtyards and the multi-use paths and the pedestrian paths between the buildings look a lot like basins. And so it's hard to understand the relationship of grade at, going back to what Matthew was talking about, the relationship of the grade with the entries to the buildings, and then also just how that grade hits the south, the knuckle of the fingers. Is it that low all the way north? And is the multi-use path, climbing enough to meet those entries?
There's so much like warped topography on the site, so it's pretty confusing. I know we have an exterior elevation that helps show that. Oh, a courtyard elevation.
Gosh, I feel like, is the 3D model, it looks so developed. Are we able to just walk into a couple of these courtyards real quick and see some of these?
And yeah, and we can certainly open that up. I'll preface it with, we recently developed the north side for these renderings. So I think the landscaped vegetation that we're showing in the model is more of a recent effort.
Yep.
But we can
Yeah,
certainly.
we're sort of showing like a turf understory rather than something that'll be planted and more sensitive and native.
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference in the model of vegetation, just because of modeling programs kind of
Yes,
a limit
for
of
sure.
what you can select for that. So there'll be definitely more development that'll be refining that vegetation. But as far as like general placement and concept of where landscape versus hardscape is accurate in the model.
I think while you're pulling that up, to kind of cut to the chase here on this, because we got a lot to talk about tonight, guys, is that basically the read of the guidelines would suggest that, you know, Olson Drive, which doesn't exist today, will one day be a beautiful street, albeit a short segment of street. If the intent would be to set a precedent that this becomes, you know, a street facing facade that's beautiful. And the challenge is that one, today it doesn't exist. So to go out there or just visit it in Google Earth Street View, I would encourage DAD members to drop themselves there. And you're looking at basically the ass end of a strip mall with visible trash and grease collection systems and back of house and probably a lot of cigarette butts. And it's not a pleasant experience. And the kind of alley comment is very well taken from staff, because I think largely in its current form, it behaves as an alley. I think what the intent here is that you guys are now the pioneer species on the redevelopment of this kind of area in Boulder. And if we set the right precedent here on Olson Drive, the intent would be that someone responding from the northern property would respond in like, and then maybe we end up with a beautiful street segment. The challenge that I realized beyond just kind of the visual impact of its existing condition is then, of course, this floodplain elevation. And if you're below which becomes very expensive and very complicated. I think, you know, there's conveyance zones here, you've got debris management, like any glass that comes below has to be rated, 4-foot tall impact zones. I mean, it's a nightmare. But I think what we'd like to try to discuss with you guys is what opportunities do we have to, one, celebrate that this will be a street one day. So kind of putting a little bit more energy and kind of visual interest and attention on it. And two, some of the creative grading and landscaping techniques that you guys are using so wonderfully kind of within the fingers and as we kind of descend on the southern end to the creek, are there opportunities to kind of warp and mound and create more visual interest on the north side so that the building feels like it meets the grade in a more kind of integrated way?
I think that's a good summary of what we're trying to do. So I have a kind of a similar question, but Amy, when you were walking us around the north side and or the east side, and then you came around to the north, the entrance is right there. Is that correct?
The entrance is on the north side of building 1. And we have
Okay.
my colleague Masood who has the model open. So if it makes sense, I'll stop sharing and let Masood steal the screen so we can jump into Lumion.
Okay, that would be helpful. So
Okay.
great.
I mean,
And can I verify on the model, the topography is accurate, but the landscaping is not quite developed on the north elevation? Is that?
For the
Yeah.
Lumion model that we're pulling up.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that the topography is mostly accurate. There's going to be some minor differences that are so slight. They're a little bit time consuming to model. So specifically for this north end,
Okay.
there was.
So it looks like because your entrance is on the north side, that is a street facing facade. The question is just whether the rest of that facade, including the sort of the service access points and things like that tend to be in the back of a building, would now then be on the street facing side. So that's sort of the challenge I think that we're looking at, is that how do you make the back of your building look like a street facing facade, as Rory put it.
Yeah, that's the way you phrase it, Todd, is similar to what I was originally getting at, is that recognizing that the entrance of the buildings isn't through the building facade itself, it's actually the space in between them. I think given that is the fact, appropriately guiding visually and circulation wise and design wise an effort at these openings in the buildings are somewhat more important than, the other 30% of the building that touches the ground, which functionally is back of house or transformers or garbage cans. I don't think there's an expectation that you can dress those areas up efficiently enough to make them worthy of the front of a building, right? So I just want to acknowledge as we go through, there are some just functional limitations of the fact that some of those areas you can't be enhanced. They maybe can be screened or,
Correct.
something.
Right.
Matt,
So
I
for
think
the
there's a
sake
big-
of,
Yeah.
so for the sake of keeping the momentum going, are there specific recommendations that DAB would make regarding the north facade? And when I say specific, I mean, we can make a recommendation sort of in principle that this is something that needs to be considered, or we can go a step further and make specific recommendations. So are there specific recommendations that I can actually write down that we can?
What
Yeah.
what is that material that's, so I know obviously board form on grade level, and then above is that
It's the metal panel that she was talking
metal
about.
panel?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have like two profiles. So we have like a narrow profile. It's just the barrage metal panel. So a narrow profile and a wider profile.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have them stacked.
Matt, I think your point is well taken, but I guess here, let me just brain dump real quick in the effort of like recommendations. I mean, right now, this does not feel like it's engaging the street. And I think the reason is because there's no entry or sort of kind of retail, commercial, public program on the street facing level of two of these three buildings. The eastern building is a gimme. It sits further back, so it's able to be landscaped with more layers. And it's entirely programmed as public amenity space or resident amenity space. So I think that, is kind of out of the equation. So then as we look at buildings 2 and 3, which are arguably, 65-70% of the length of this facade and street frontage, we're greeted by units, which, it's important as far as meeting unit density and kind of pro forma goals. We've got all of the waste collection happening as kind of the punctuative programmatic element at the end of the 2 or 3 units. And then we've got in the middle building, we've got a portion of corridor that exposes itself. But on the building 3, we do not necessarily have that opportunity. And in this effort, the entries, as you've identified, Matt, have been pushed kind of through these fingers and then into the sides of the building. So I think, 2 basic approaches from my perspective is, one, can the Rubik's Cube be twisted a few times, and can you actually create an entry off of the north elevation that doesn't disrupt, your 3 or 4 story plan here? And trash being kind of maybe an obvious contender of movement. Or 2, and I think, Matt, this is what you were getting at, can these landscape entries be kind of further designed with, overhead element, signage element, monumental elements that actually acknowledge kind of an architectural entry, even if you are not entering the thermal envelope? They will provide potentially the front door experience or quality of design abstracted that staff may be looking for.
That's pretty much what I was
Well
suggesting.
said.
There's however you said it sounded amazing.
Can I,
But seriously, the level of landscape architecture on the south side of the site and the ability to weave the public path in compared to this, and I know, and I understand this, we're looking at, in progress kind of options here, But here we're looking at two parallel detached sidewalks, basically, with not a lot of engaging circulation. And I think, part of what we're seeing, these two parallel paths don't help the argument, don't help the effort to, create more visual interest and engagement on the south. And I know that probably Red just had that process in the design. But like this spot right here could have a different landscape treatment that heightens its character. And that really, you have a landscape entrance to two buildings. I think that's kind of a cool idea. And we may not have to rely on like a lot of architectural, movement on the facade itself as a result. Anyway, but
Yeah.
however you said it, Rory, was
Mark, can I, let me
right on.
keep the discussion going with the people who've raised their hands. So Mark and then Kevin.
Thanks. I just wanted to build on what Rory and Matthew were saying and urge the applicant to go visit 34th Street south of Valmont, which was going to be a Twitter building. But that street is one of the most innovative and creative streets, I think, in Boulder. And I understand that maybe form-based code and stuff allowed them to do some different street design than what the city would normally allow. But it's an active street that almost doesn't feel like a street. It's so pedestrian, but yet you have access, you have truck access. But it's just such a creative design. It's a narrow street, it's a little dark, but you get on there and the car feels like the visitor, the pedestrian feels like the person that really belongs there, but it's mixed with infrastructure access. So I really encourage that because I think that this Olson Way could be an example, just like Rory said, hey, you're the leader here in this area, and you have an opportunity with kind of to clean up, have a clean slate from what is now back of house sort of thing. So anyway, I would encourage a review of 34th Street south of Belmont.
Thanks, Mark. Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the comments, Mark. We'll absolutely take a look at that. So a couple things to be aware of on the north elevation. Of course, we have to tie back down to grade. So that's one of the things that makes, that's why this is an area where the ground floor is so much higher over. So to the north of our project is also a conveyance zone. It's not just to the south where the creek goes. So in a big flood event, we anticipate that this is an area of conveyance as well. So that's one factor to consider in terms of our ability to navigate the grade. And the other is, I can assure you we've had extensive conversations with our friends in transportation about the character of the street section, parking through there. And it probably just worth noting for folks that one of the things that the applicant is committed to is that secondary sidewalk is almost strictly a result of them trying to take trash as much to the building 3, the far west building, for collection, so that you don't have these activities going on through the courtyards between buildings 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. So it's, and the feedback that we got from transportation was that transporting that trash, whether it's by hand truck or cart or rolling bin on a public right of way, was not acceptable. So that's what drove the second path there. We admit it's a little funny from a landscape point of view, and it's not exactly how we would design this in a different situation. But so it's three factors. There's the grade, there's the flood, there's the trash collection, but there's also just that sort of project logistics of trying to localize that pickup point from just one building, because that's what we kind of mentioned in the intro to this. Is we have 3 buildings that don't have a backside, but to somebody else's point, thank you for recognizing that. Yeah, there's trash, there's transformers, there's generator, there's like all these other components that do reflect the reality of that.
I think, or go ahead, Kevin.
No, and I think in terms of articulation, there aren't ground, like one of the obvious ways that you might consider doing this is a ground level stoop entry to these units. From a building safety and security point of view, that's not a condition we have even down the courtyards. So it's not preferable to do that, but I do think we could look at more articulation with a base of the building. You know, right now, we've made a deliberate choice to bring the exterior material down and not articulate a different base. But that may be a cue, along with the vertical, you know, these in and out recesses of the balconies and the base of that coming out. That may be something from a design point of view that we can play up a little bit more.
So
Yeah.
I can't help but go back to, you know, we reviewed a student housing project just across the street from this project. And I can't help but go back to some of the discussion that we had there, and that there just needed to be sort of a, in my mind, when you're approaching this project from on 28th Street from the north, whether you're coming from the north or the south, there seems to be, it seems to be missing some kind of a wayfinding or highlighting element, you know, coming into this project as a whole. And then when you're just looking at the north elevation, I'm concerned that it's, while we like rhythm, and you know, the punched openings are nice and there's like a good amount of glazing, and I like the treatment of the wood in the balconies recessed, and it gives that, you know, the concrete and metal a little bit of warmth. But I'm just really concerned that there's no variation in, you know, east to west or base to parapet top. There's no variation in this materiality or color for a large portion of this facade until you get to like the transformer elevations, where it's just, you know, where there are no windows and it's a very stark warehousey facade. And it's concerning. You know, there's portions of this that have, you know, we have like the ribbon window, and then we have no windows, and then we have the rhythm of punched openings. I'm just concerned about, you know, there's a nice variety and breakup in materials and the face of the building on the other elevations, but the north elevation sort of breaks from that design and that rhythm in giving some variety and variation in materials and perspective and depth and breaking up of that rhythm.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts in response to a few people's comments here. I think as far as the waste collection component, I guess building one has its waste collection halfway down its courtyard. So as far as kind of the north being the logical location for pickup, it's not consistent. So I'm not sure that we can rely on that as a design driver of why waste has been located on, I think what staff is trying to communicate is the front facing street facade. And then as far as the grading component, I mean, I agree with what Brendan's saying, is that we've got 4-story tall masses that are clad, you know, wall to wall, ground to parapet with the same materials. Do we want to evaluate? I mean, I don't want to necessarily tell you how to design your building, but you know, just bringing in some more urbanism of creating kind of the pedestrian scale ground floor plinth. Is it 3/1? Is it 1/3? Is there some kind of penthouse expression or something to help kind of break these masses down? Again, I know you've probably been very thoughtful as far as the elemental and form driven clad architecture here. But just to further that, because I think Kevin, you kind of touched on it a little bit about kind of treating the base as potentially exploring materiality or some delineation of this is the base, which may help obscure some of this plinth we're talking about. And then I think just to further that, again, if those elements could jump off the building and somehow populate like an architectural language that defines portals into these courtyards, that you may be able to sell that successfully as entries shown on the north facade and not just void that you have a sidewalk to get in, right? There's some sort of celebrated front door, albeit a gate or a portal driven with landscape technique. I do think, and you guys can tell me, and maybe, is it Callan, the landscape architect?
Caitlin.
Kaylin. You know, this north facade seems candidate for some of these like Asian inspired, you know, mounded architectural components where you can kind of quickly achieve grade and layering in a way that can greet the building and conceal this kind of obnoxious floodplain protection layer that I know you're kind of been dealt the hand here. But would create some sort of, you know, significant interest with landscape solution that allows you to get back to the street grade rather quickly, but then make a very good case that you are kind of screening and layering and grading up to the building. It's just odd to me that along the entire north facade, we have a black line that looks like it was drawn with a May line.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think ideally we would be able to slope up to the building on the north side, kind of south of that, call it second sidewalk, that we're talking about using for trash and circulation. Kind of back to what Kevin was saying, this area is like highly dictated by the floodplain. So any change that we make in this area, ever so slight, has a ripple effect across the site because this floodplain is so complicated. And so it's very sensitive to any sort of grade change or adjustment. So we can certainly look at if that's a possibility in the model, but we have to work with our civil engineer and our floodplain engineer to determine if that's even feasible without causing a rise or some other ripple effect due to the split flows that Kevin mentioned earlier. So I agree that it's desirable. If it's not feasible, I think we're going to try and use landscape material, plant material to our benefit for screening purposes, which I would say is probably what you're not seeing here, right? Like you're just seeing a green ground plane massing and not seeing that vertical element, which we will have. So I think if we were to add that element to it, it would definitely help soften. And on the north side there, we do have a decent amount of distance for buffer to actually put in some plant material that'll get a bit taller there and help screen kind of that ground piece that comes from the finished floor across the podium down to the ground plane. So I think we can definitely look at if there's any possibility to manipulate grade in here. Some of which you're not seeing as well in there, kind of behind the sidewalk along Olson where we have that wider planting area down the middle, has a slight depression as sort of a swale along the entire length of that. So that's one of the subtleties to the landscape that didn't quite make it into this model, but there'll be a slight manipulation of grade there. So I think there's other features we can utilize to try and accomplish some of these concerns if we're not able to utilize grade in the manner that we are talking about. So we can definitely look into materials and vegetation. And I think wayfinding is a key one that the consultant team has mentioned. So I think there's definitely some possibilities to look into.
So I really do like that landscape buffer because as Rory said, if you go down that alley, it's loading docks and it is not, it's service entry for sure. And it's really these kind of windowless back of building facade on the other side of the street. So I really do like that landscape buffer. I think on your site plan, it said it was like 35 feet or something. I mean, it's very generous. But I do kind of, again, going back to this, this articulation and architectural detailing on that of the materials themselves. I think on another review for the diagonal plaza, to me, when I see this much, and I love this, I mean, I use this barrage like MDEC as fencing and siding all the time in projects, and I do think it can be used effectively, and but I wonder if there's just not quite enough articulation in it and variety in it to create it. It has a feeling of like a container ship, a shipping container, you know, and I just think it just needs more variation and articulation detailing.
Okay, great, thanks. So I feel like we need to move on to the next issue that we need to talk about. Is that everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think it
Um,
plays into it, doesn't it?
Pardon me?
It plays into it. I mean, it's talking about the entries. So we're
Yes.
kind of taking 2 of the 4 here.
Well, what's the next one that we need to go to then that's sort of tied into this? Is it the,
So item B is saying the design of the entries at the northern area of the buildings coupled with the grade change negatively impact the accessible entry locations, causing circuitous routes that bypass non-accessible entry points. Please review and provide recommendations to help improve circulation patterns and wayfinding for different user types. So I think kind of in the vein of this discussion, it's very well organized. Can we walk down one of these entries? I think can we walk down the interstitial space between building 2 and 3? And I think what's happening is we are basically building 2 does not have an accessible entry from the interstitial space. And I'm looking at a diagram from staff that would suggest you'd have to walk entirely through this finger around to the bike path
And further
and back
east,
into
Masood.
the courtyard.
well,
Otherwise,
this is from the western parking lot, right?
this would be from, the northern sidewalk. So depending on if you parked in the east or the west or on street or got dropped off by an Uber or whatever.
Yeah, and I think we can point out a clarification about that. There is an accessible entrance there. I think it was incorrectly identified in the staff report. So when we get over to there, between buildings 2 and 3 towards the north, the entrance through that bike room, that's one of the areas where grade comes up to meet it. So it was a great point. Thank you. But this grade, yeah, thanks, Masood, where we come in through here, you can see this raising up through here. So that entrance into building 2 to the east is accessible. It's, that's one of the instances where we raised up for grade.
Got it. And that entry is through a bike room though, correct?
Correct. Yeah. For both, fully able people and otherwise, it's folks bringing a bike in are going to park there and the same as anybody else, whether it's a trike or an assisted cycle or something.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused about what we're looking at here.
So we're
And-
looking, if it's helpful, we're looking south in between the opening. Building 3 is on our right and building 2 is on the left. So there's an opening underneath this wooden projecting mass that goes into the bike room at building 2, and that is an accessible entry. You can see steps to the right up here leading to the entry at building 3, and there's a ramp further south.
So
Okay.
if
So
that,
it is accessible, just a little more circuitous.
So it
So-
sounds like this comment B maybe has already been.
no, I think we're addressing it. So that is a moot point at this point. I don't know, Kailani, if you want to shake your head, I don't see you. Yeah, as far as that's an accessible entry. So I think the last one
Yeah,
in
that one.
contention would be the actual west elevation. So if somebody were to be parking in the identified accessible parking spaces at the northwest corner, the diagram I'm looking at from staff would suggest
The
there's
bike
a
entry.
non-accessible entry directly in front of it on the west facade, and that you'd actually have to either go all the way into a fingered courtyard or
Or back
around
around to
into
this
the
area.
interstitial space.
Right.
Yeah. And is that labels, because some of the labels were and the line work on the circulation diagram.
Yeah, that would be correct. So that would be, Masood, if we were looking at the other side of building.
All the way
West
west.
facing, I think is what the question is about, but that is inaccessible, mostly because of the grade change that we have right along the edge of the building there and the requirement for a walkway. And very little room laterally to fit in, a ramp on that side. And so we studied that and it just wasn't feasible from an accessibility standpoint. I think if we were able to, we would make that an accessible entry. But from a grading standpoint, it just wasn't possible. So we sort of talked as a team, do we locate the accessible parking on the northwest corner and kind of have someone directed around the north side of the building, or on the southwest corner and go around the south side of the building, sort of following the Boulder Creek path? And we as a team decided that it felt safer and shorter distance to go the north route rather than the south way and kind of jump onto the Boulder Creek path. So that's sort
If
of
we
the-
can look at the west facade, I think he's getting there right now, and then basically from that parking lot looking back. So there we have the trash on the lower left, guys, right? Garage roll up, and then those stairs right there adjacent to the striped ADA spaces. This is the area we're talking about, is that essentially if you're driving your car to a handicap space, you park here, and you either have to go left around that building until you get to the courtyard and then go down the courtyard into the entry, or you have to go right down that, what looks really long in this perspective, onto the bike path to then get back up and button hook into the finger courtyard to get to an accessible entry. So I think there's clearly two ways to manage this. One is just moving, like you said, ADA parking spaces somewhere that's more convincing that the route is kind of convenient. Or it's about figuring out, and when you say that it's infeasible, I mean, we have to remember that, a lot of times we create the infeasibilities, right? Because we're designing these projects. A ramp, you guys have done a great job with ramps elsewhere on the project. I realize this particular facade looks awfully tight to parking and it's providing kind of a minimum 5-foot sidewalk. So I realize there's kind of unit counts and, courtyard widths and separations. And I know there's a lot of thought that goes into this stuff. So I guess that's me digesting the problem out loud. I'm not sure that I just have a solution to rattle off the top of my head here, but I don't know if someone else from DAB wants to jump in. And guys, I'm looking at DAB members. I've got, kind of the main level floor plan pulled up, but I'm also looking at staff's, comment B and C, where they've got this diagram of accessible versus non-accessible entries as a reference.
Can you describe why maybe back up to what we were looking at in terms of that handicap parking, and describe the grade, the elevation problem that exists there that doesn't allow you to have an access point there?
Yeah, so what you're seeing, I believe there's 4 handicap stalls on this side. And those would have a curb ramp up onto the sidewalk. And the distance between the required width of the sidewalk. Let's see if you want to zoom back into where you just were. The distance between the back of the sidewalk and the door entrance doesn't give us adequate width for providing a ramp there that meets code requirements for width and slope and ramping. So
It's the width and the slope of the ramp, of a wheelchair ramp, that doesn't work.
correct.
It doesn't fit.
Yeah, but like if you recess that entry, you'd be bailing on your bike room. I mean, there's infinite solutions here, but
Right. Sorry.
the maintenance shop appears to be on grade. Is that accurate? And it's just a few spots further south in the parking lot. So I think, there's a horse trade to be had here. This building
We
needs
were
to
eyeing
grade
that.
appropriately somewhere. And, again, I don't know off the top of my head, all the ADA, like if it needs to be within, 100-foot radius of a parking spot, if it needs to be, from a public right of way. So if someone's coming on the sidewalk, it needs to be, but I think your finger entries are handling sidewalk pretty nicely as far as proximity for ADA. This particular parking lot may benefit from more southerly location and access point for parking. I think the other concern would be, once in the building, the vertical conveyance system proximity to the accessible entrance. That seems to be a challenge really just on building 3, I think.
So are we saying as DAB that there should be a handicap access point there?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that, right now the entrance is recessed, but what if the entrance was pulled out to the sidewalk, in plane with the face of those balconies and you now, and put it grade, and now the ramp can be internalized. I think you might lose a couple of bike parking spots, but there is opportunity for ramps inside, not just outside. And it's, do you know what the grade is here? I was trying to count that. Is it 3 feet or something that we're?
I think that sounds right, about 3 feet.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a massive ramp. But I do think that there could be a happy medium of some ramping outside, some ramping inside, but I do think that ideally that spot would be accessible, or that entry, I think, needs to be accessible.
Well, and is there not also I mean, we talked about the maintenance shop, you could trade program. I don't, I haven't studied your building in good enough detail to know, the structural logic and things, but is this kind of water entry, electric, and where the waste is coming in? I mean, you were able to fit a switchback stair in that location. Is this an opportunity to address 2 comments to kind of ramp from the north with a combination of any grade that you may be able to manipulate? I realize there's kind of 2 conveyance zones, but you're always draining away from the building. So grading towards your building shouldn't be a major issue. And then you could create a more celebrated entry on this north facade and start ticking some staff boxes here. So I'm on the north facade. If whoever the pilot is here, if you kind of just go right around the corner and we see the switchback stair that's kind of going into a utility entry, I would assume there's enough room to potentially stretch a switchback ramp that may address some of the other comments as well. I mean, I think I guess, is it fair to say, and I'm looking at staff here, that we want a more proximate accessible parking to accessible entry. And ideally it would then be to the accessible vertical conveyance system, but I think that's kind of beyond this discussion. And so there's a number of ways that you could move, the accessible spaces further down the line to where the building better meets grade and kind of horse trade a bike and maintenance facility. I think this north facade is an opportunity to study, which may address comment A. But I don't think you're backed into a corner on this comment.
No, I think that you summarized that well, Rory, that there's some options here, maybe some program movement in different areas, but I think you could solve probably 3 of our guidelines, the site review criteria and the BVRC guidelines, by taking a look at some of these discrete areas, improving the accessibility. And while it might meet ADA in the letter of the law, right? There's this intention that if you have you're asking people to park here, but they can't use that stair there, that's not really the kind of spirit of that. And it's typically not best practice, especially in this. So on a whole, I don't think that we're not talking about kind of large adjustments to the whole building design, but there's some critical areas regarding these particular things that we'd like you to solve to meet site review criteria and the BVRC guidelines.
It sounds like it's on your radar anyway, from what you've said. So I don't think we need to make any more specific recommendation about this particular issue. We can move on.
The only other comment I would like to make, and again, I'm not well studied on your plans, but the corner looks like, between bike, accessible entry, waste, and this maintenance shop, it looks like there could, there's available Rubik's cubing to potentially put an accessible entry that can be overindulged because it's also the bike storage, and move waste in a way that's still fully accessible off of the drive aisle, and treat this corner, which will largely be kind of the entry to your project from anybody coming from Folsom in the future, which I know there's plans to connect whatever this new drive is across the street to some redevelopment down the road north of the field house, as a true entry beacon.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that.
You said, Roy, you said treat it as a true entry.
Yeah, like an entry beacon, like, you know, a glassy corner that's got bike storage or ramp entry. It addresses like 5 comments of staff. I think it relatively simply could be Rubik's down this west facade in a way that preserves all of the other necessary parameters that I know you guys are solving for.
Right. I mean, I think it's a matter of stacking those units, which I understand the efficiency in that, but I agree that this, there is access off of Folsom, although people don't use it very often now because it feels like such an alley, but I agree that this is the corner, this is one of the corners that people are going to see first, and it's very back of house service yardy, and it could be, like you said, we're just programmatically shifted, which ripples to all 4 floors, I realize, but to create more of an entry moment or some kind of a feature.
Yeah, it's really just that trash chute, which you guys have some pretty nifty widgets in your layouts here. So I'm sure you've got a version where you can trash chute somewhere else. No,
Okay, good.
this is good, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we ready to move on? If we're ready, I want to ask if anybody needs to take a break. If you want to take a break right now,
Let's power through.
power through,
Yeah.
take a break on your own if you need to.
Yeah.
Everybody okay with that?
We lose Brendan. She's gonna turn into a pumpkin soon, so we gotta make sure we've got enough time.
Yeah, I'm hard stop at 7:20.
We're making good progress, I feel like. I don't know, maybe that's just my optimism, but
Yeah, I think we are. So let's move on to the third issue, which is the I believe that's our
this is the plinth issue here now, where we're
Yes.
saying comment D.
exposed podium.
Yeah, the flood constraints require elevating the first floor of the building. This has created an exposed podium around the perimeter of each building, measuring in areas up to approximately 6 feet. The podium lacks human scale elements. Acknowledging the building's first floor elevation will likely not change, review strategies and options to help address softening the exposed podium. The exterior courtyards, or the finger courtyards, are designed with more human scale elements around the podium, where the exterior perimeter is not addressed to the same level of detail. Staff would like an additional attention paid to the buffer space around the ground floor residential units along the parking lots of building 1 and 3 and along the walkways between buildings. So this is tidy, right? All these comments are tying into each other.
Yeah, is there a particularly I guess egregious example of this issue?
Well, this
I-
goes back to my question at the very beginning of this, and that I'm looking at the elevation of building 1, the west courtyard elevation, and it's showing that plinth is essentially eliminated by the time it gets to the south facade, and but in other areas, it looks like the plinth is still there for the whole length of that courtyard. I just need clarification if the that massive base continues all the way into the knuckles of the fingers. Or if the grade comes up and meets the ground floor.
So the
Yeah.
the grade varies. Maybe I'll take a stab, Amy, and then you can.
Okay.
The grade varies depending on the location. So some courtyards are higher at building finished floor. Some courtyards kind of gradually slope from finished floor down to existing floodplain elevation. Along the sides of the building, like the edge that we're looking at right now, we're going from finished floor to existing grade. And so that's about 5 feet. And we don't have the ability to slope between that because we have to get parking down to a certain elevation. So it's more exaggerated on the 2 end sides of the buildings, the east and the west of building 1 and 3. but the interior courtyards, they all vary, so they kind of transition between finished floor and then a more gradual sloping elevation down south.
These courtyards are gorgeous. Spread the love to the perimeter of the building.
Yes, totally. Totally. Like this, this treatment on, oh, am I getting ahead of myself? I think the final question, the buffer,
No,
never mind. We can talk about that later.
oh, yeah.
No, Brendan, the questions or the issues, when we put them together, they're very closely tied. So if they blend together, we can kind of summarize these all at the end, and I think they'll.
I mean, this is epic. This looks lively and thoughtful and fun to hang out, and addresses kind of access and accent in a wonderful way. Clearly, the skill set is available on this team.
Yeah, the variation in materiality.
Yeah,
So I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think we can apply some of these concepts, especially to like the north end that we looked at in materiality. I think where we're really constrained is the east and the west sides of the project, where we don't really have any flexibility to resolve that grade in the landscape. We do have a little bit of room for landscape buffer, but we're sort of meeting the minimum requirements laterally on the site for parking, circulation, north-south multi-use path connections, depending on the side of the site. So it's a little bit challenging on the edges, but I think the north definitely allows us more room. The nice thing about the courtyards is we have the length of the building and these fingers to make up that grade. So that's what allows us to either sort of do like a really elegant ramp or sloped walkway, whereas it's much more condensed around the perimeter of the building, which is.
I'm less fluent in sort of the flood impact of kind of site improvements, but are we unable to provide like retaining, bench height retaining, and then 2-to-1, really dramatic kind of sloping planting material, stuff that just is going to make the perimeter feel really designed?
Like a raised planting bed or something?
Yeah, like having, planters that create some sort of rhythm. Can they be at differing heights? Can the slope of the grade not, be steep or a bubble or something that's, again, is creating variety and interest, particularly on the north facade, but even this east facade here, I guess, do we need to maintain grade at sidewalk, or can we go vertical immediately once you get the width of the clear sidewalk required and start to, create ground plane rhythm?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we can work with our floodplain engineer to understand our ability to manipulate the grade in those areas.
Just tell them you'll put weeps in the walls, let it all through.
Make it a science fail. There we go.
I think that this east elevation is, in my mind, the most important elevation. It's the gateway to Boulder. It's, on the other side of the
Amen.
street, we reviewed a project, student housing, that is like, it was all about the articulation and the, being this like beacon and, the gateway to Boulder. And this is the first building that we're really seeing as we come down that hill off of 28th. And while, anything is an improvement, I think, from the Harvest House, I just wonder if, and I understand that, like, giving this building articulating some type of a base in this building is not the designed intent. It's not the direction that this building is going in. But I get the sense that the landscape is, the landscaping, the planting is trying to fill that role, and it's just not quite, it's not quite tying this flat facade into the grounding and the base of this and giving it sort of this true entrance and excitement that I think that this facade needs. And if you go around the corner and you get the sales office and that fairly interesting element that's on the,
The amenity program.
yeah, the northwest, yeah, we're getting that one. I mean, I want to see something like that, you know, as we're coming into the corner of this building from the north and the south. I would love to see some type of interest. I mean, I think that that is interesting, and I think, but it's tucked back far enough that you're not, you know, we talk a lot about the pedestrian experience of these buildings, but I think that this building is primarily going to be experienced in a vehicle, that most people are going to be seeing this project, you know, driving by it on 28th Street. And I would like to see something happening on that east facade. And I agree that that sort of flat landscape coming from the sidewalk, coming straight into the building, and then it going straight up is, it just needs something.
So Brendan, are we getting into the fourth issue in
We
this
are.
discussion?
Well, I
Yeah.
think that they're tied. I mean, I think, you know, we really like, I like the experience of being in the knuckles, in the fingers. I think that they've been, the architecture's been articulated really well and detailed, and the human scale is there, and the landscape and the plantings and the variation of programming within the landscaping is there. I just, like Rory said, I just would love to see it pulled onto the outside
Right.
facades of these
So
buildings.
I guess what I'm wondering is, are we still in the discussion about the softening the exposed podium, or have we
I think
sort
it's
of,
both. Yeah, I think there's kind of, while softening the podium is your opportunity to buffer the ground floor units.
Right.
So D and E are happening simultaneously here.
Right, that plinth has been successfully buffered, in my opinion, on the south. You know, if you're looking at the building from the south, it's been more successful, I think. So in an
I mean,
effort to buffer that plinth, it would be nice to see some of that same language brought out.
I mean, I couldn't agree more that this is, I mean, you guys have a heavy responsibility here. This is the gateway to Boulder, and there's a lot of shit precedent along 28th right now. So while it's easy to shine in a pile of shit, it'd be awesome if it was a gem. And I think to further the discussion, I guess a few comments. One, there, you know, other than the size of the fenestration, where we've got kind of more of a storefront, larger expanse of glazing that is indicating public program, that's it. The line stops there. It's just, you know, here's a wall and here's some units because they've got small operables, and then here is a public program because it's got a larger storefront assembly. There's got to be a way to kind of draw more architectural intent and articulation, whether it's material change, mass, you know, undercut, whatever, you know, I don't want to screw with your structural logic, but to further identify these, you know, I'd say in this view, the most successful component is the standard, and it's probably because there's a big sign there, right? That makes it obvious to realize that that's an important thing. But you get the rest of this rambling corner with storefront that then just becomes a different window punch in the same wall. It would be, to me, the building would become more legible if, you know, material or mass kind of addressed the public program. And then kind of a larger guiding principle. What I think you guys have done incredibly well here is taken a very large project and applied kind of a massing and materiality scheme that is project wide. So when you go zoom out, you know, 200 miles and you look at this from a Google Earth sort of diagrammatic perspective, the way that you talked about kind of the ombre effect across the building, the stepping down to the public path and Creekside, the articulation of kind of the metal bar, you know, on the north versus kind of these, you know, more residentially sized units that are broken by kind of the entry points of wood and then different bricks. That is all incredibly sound logic. I guess I would be interested, and I don't know what the budget is on this building, but in applying that same core set of diagrammatic breakdown principles to then the buildings themselves. Right now, I feel like you've broken down like the carcass, but we haven't started cutting fillets out of it yet, if that makes sense.
Okay. Are there other, since we've sort of transitioned into this fourth issue, are there other things we want to talk about in terms of issue number 4 that deal both with the west side and the east side, and trying to create more of a landscape buffer to buffer the units that are there? So what I see here is this kind of a thin line of ability to plant things in there on both the east and west sides. So there's not a whole lot of buffer there.
I mean, I agree that there's not a lot of width, but and in the presentation in the beginning, there was some talk about creating these landscape tiers at the north facade at the entry. It seems like it's something that can be done. I understand that the width of between the sidewalk and the facade of the building is narrower, but the same landscape interest and treatment and the tiers that are happening on that north facade, I think is successful. And wondering if something like that could be brought around the corner or extended around the corner.
Specifically, what are you referring to on the north?
The tiers where you see between the cars.
Oh,
and
right,
you have
okay.
some sidewalk, and then you have some landscaped tiers happening.
Right.
If that could be brought around, and that goes back to Rory's suggestion for creating some type of a planter, raised planter bed, planter platforms, some type of articulation of these planters that could be pulled around that corner.
Right.
I think we can definitely work with the floodplain engineer to understand if we can create some more height in that space. I think we're kind of due to constraints set on that width, and you can kind of see, I mean, in the front we have 25 feet, and then on the east side we have 5 feet, so it's a pretty significant difference there. But I think the other thing too with sort of subdividing that and creating tiers is you may get a little more height of landscape, but you get sort of less width. So some of the bigger plants that usually get wider and taller, you kind of end up with a couple of smaller staggered versions. Not to say that we couldn't explore it as an option.
Okay.
I
Are you
want
guys constrained by on the floodplain by storage capacity? Is that the issue, that you're displacing storage capacity of the floodplain itself?
I'm not sure.
Everything affects everything in this one. I mean, the poor guys at ACE, will say, oh, we want to lift this up 6 inches, and the hydrodynamics of this site are so incredibly complex. So it's, yes, I mean, I was wondering on this east facade, like if we had a series of planters to help articulate that base. Maybe we go back to the plan diagram, Kaylin. I can't remember if we're right up against that or if we do have some flexibility in that landscape area. What we can't do, to answer the primary question, is like we can't push the parking lot any closer to 28th because that's pretty disastrous from the flood modeling. Not disastrous, it's bad. I should, poor choice of words, I apologize. Yeah, so if we get any closer to 28, then we get into all sorts of retaining walls and kind of furthering a not great condition of the flood conveyance model through there.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd add to that from a layout standpoint, the parking lot, we have a set dimension from the property line, we have a set dimension of the parking lot width itself, and then we have a set dimension of the the walkway along the building. So when you put all those together, we're kind of left with the space in between, unfortunately. So we don't have any lateral width, east or west
Mhm.
on the site to be able to push and pull that parking.
And our best ability to add to that area would really be to remove parking spaces, and there's already a pretty substantial parking reduction
Right.
being contemplated. And we actually have, I mean, through working through transportation engineering, and utilities, just a lot of the site drainage, there's a lot more green in the parking lot than initially proposed. And that's been part of kind of the negotiated response to the first round of site review.
Okay.
I would add, I think we have more opportunity on the east side here. There's 5-foot planting area next to the building as currently shown, and it's in the shadow of the floodplain. And so I think we might have some more opportunity with raising different plinths or benches or retaining walls in that area, where I think on the west side, it's only 2 feet wide, and that's the higher end of the site. And so I think adding height to that planting area on the west side will be more challenging.
You also,
Yeah, on the
Awesome.
west side is much drier and hotter as well. That's a
you
constraint.
also hit grade more quickly on the west side, right? So this is a little bit less of a concern. You're on grade at the maintenance shack, right?
Yeah, that's a function of the the site fall as it goes, that 6 or 8 feet as you go from west to east.
Well,
Like, look at this
I'm also-
CIS, Brendan. Doesn't that, I mean, like the fact, like there, you're starting to articulate like penthouse versus 3-story building. You're starting to articulate, like, I think that is some of the kind of material interest without turning this thing into like a fashion statement. Because I appreciate kind of the rigor and the massing and kind of delineation of function, but is there any way to link things? Like, again, I don't want to tell you guys what to do, but has there been any studies that would suggest, the upper 3 levels link their
Yeah.
windows with panels or something, just to start to, not just look like, a plate diagram from a hotel over a parking layout.
Right.
I almost added this when we were talking more about the materiality of the metal panel, but we do have 3/1 for building 3, and at building 2, it's the opposite, a 1/, or I guess this facade we're looking at is 1/3, where we're having the more narrow metal panel up at the top, and then
Yeah.
the wider metal panel. So there is a slight play. I hear that feedback of it being too monotonous, but I did want to point that out.
Yeah, there's some horizontality and a breakup in the horizontality and the verticality with just color change and material change. I mean, I understand on the south side that there is some stepping of the building, but we're just not seeing any of that for 100 feet or whatever. All the way around the building, the parapet is the exact same height. And the finished material is the exact same height. But I do think that this helps visually break that up. And then I'm not paying even as much attention to the plinth or the
That's right.
board
The
form
podium.
concrete, the podium. Like there's a big board form concrete podium beneath that balcony, but it doesn't. My eye's not drawn to it, because there is more variety and materiality in colors.
I don't know.
Just, if I can interject, just because everyone has a different opinion, I'll offer a different one. Like, I love the fact, I love the fact that the building has a very consistent color. It's a block. It contributes to the language and the form of the overall development. If I were designing, I would be hesitant to just start patching different colors into this section, because it takes away the legibility of, this is a different side of a 16-acre site. And so I think, tempering that with, yes, it's a big structure and it could be monotonous interior material, I would just, offer maybe subtle variation, which is happening at the top floor, but you have a lot of the thinner gauge metal panel or the thinner corrugated metal panel as the, let's say 90% material. It might be creative or fun to start mixing that, taking some of that other scale and maybe introduce, other bands or sections. And maybe not going with a completely different color, but changing the texture. I think that could be really vibrant too, with shadows and as the day changes. So like I said, just because everyone has a slightly different opinion, I wouldn't go so far as to start patching in a whole new language or palette of material.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matthew. I think this particular board composition on DAB is not fond of trying to turn big buildings into small, cute buildings. It's a small world after all. So make sure that's tempering this entire discussion.
Yeah.
It's subtle. Yeah, that's a very important comment.
Let me get Mark's comment.
And well, the topic has moved away from my comment, so
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No. When we were talking about planters and the kind of landscaping effect and the need for the landscaping on certain elevations, as we've been moving around the model, I just keep seeing very small, narrow strips and islands of turf, of sod. And my question is that best practice in the West these days to have these high water use, high maintenance strips that no one really visits in any meaningful way? And I understand they provide a visual buffer, but in terms of, or is the model just not really developed yet in terms of, okay, we put grass in there for now, but later it will be tall grasses, bushes, etc. So that's kind of more of a question. Is it best practice?
No,
And
Mark, I
really
think you're on
important?
it. I think they addressed that early on. It was quick, so I don't know if you caught it. But
Okay.
that was something they definitely cautioned as they pulled this model up, is that
Okay.
the understory of planting is sorely underrepresented here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Which we understand. We play with models a bunch, so we get it. What about the corners? Are these opportunities? I mean, again, I don't know the pro forma of a student kind of dormitory housing, but if this were an apartment building, these corners would drive kind of premium unit pricing and would suggest it to the public with, big corner glass and, articulating the fact that you have the opportunity to have rooms with light on two sides. But they're they're just taking the chorus, or kind of the rhythm section is just punching around the corner here.
Before we go there, have we sort of covered the four questions that staff has raised, and have we now moved on to other DAB topics? And if not, can we wrap up the four issues before we kind of move on?
Katlani, how are you feeling?
Yes, you have addressed the issues that we put forth on the key issues. We would like to get those summarized for the minutes though. So as a
Yes.
concerted effort for the board to go through right now, summarize those. And then if you don't mind, then we can start to talk about maybe more the materiality or the layup or kind of the general patterning and organization of those other items.
I was hoping we could do that all at once, the summarization, but
If you feel like you guys will remember these further down the discussion, yes, we could do it towards the end. But if it's fresh right now and it's easy to summarize right now, that might also be helpful.
I have a lot of notes that I think that we can go back through and kind of remind people what we were talking about. So I would prefer to keep going.
Okay.
But I want to remind people that it's 6 now. So I don't know if we need a full hour or if we're almost finished.
You've been to a DAB meeting before, right, Todd?
yeah, we have gotten through, we've gotten through this fairly quickly. I think compared to some past meetings, but I know that there's probably more to talk about that doesn't directly affect the 4 issues. And I want to make sure we have time to do that, but I don't. I'd still kind of like to do that fairly quickly because we schedule a meeting from 4 to 6, and one of these days I think it would be nice to try to stick to it. Maybe this is not the right project because it is probably the largest project we've had in a while.
Todd, Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I could make a comment. This is Chris Shears. I've been listening. If that's all right, can I just make a general comment?
Sure.
As a former member of what was DDAB years and years ago and chair for many, many years, I want to say that I think I'll speak for our entire team that the review over these last 2 hours and as it continues is very effective. The way that you run the meeting, the way that you began the meeting in a positive note, the comments that are spot on as far as I think this team is concerned. It's just impressive. We do a lot of design review. We sit on both sides of that, and we have a lot of respect for the process. We know it's difficult, and I just want to say that I'm impressed. I think our whole team is impressed, and after all, the whole point of this is the projects improve through a couple of hours of discussion as we're having. This is a very high level design discussion that you don't often see with design review boards. And so I just want to thank the board and you as chairman managing this meeting for that. I've got to actually drive to Boulder, where I live and have lived for 40 years. But I just wanted to say that. I also want to tell Mark that he really needs to turn the lights on. I'm not sure why you're in the dark, but you deserve.
He's in the woods.
You deserve to have the lights on. So, but thank you, all of you, and for Kalani for her review, which was spot on as well. This project is better for this. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Chris.
I'd be curious if anybody on DAB, Brendan, Matthew, you guys are just starting to peel the onion a little bit outside of the staff task focus items as far as just general massing and character and fenestration.
What I'd like to do as we move forward is to focus as much as we can on recommendations. And I know that there has to be some discussion leading up to that, but I'd like to sort of get that on people's radar, that that's what we're trying to sort of get out of this. So it may be helpful to make a recommendation and then explain why you think that's a good recommendation. I think that, and I mean, we could move around the entire, complex as much as we need to. I always get a ton out of listening to the discussion, but I am also feeling the pressure to make sure that I get something, that we get some specific recommendations for city council and for the applicant. So that's a great view.
I think one of the recommendations would be, and it's mostly just a summary, is a special articulation or treatment of these major corners of this building. Maybe not necessarily building 2, but for sure buildings 1 and 3 with these north corners that need to have some type of distinction or just just clarification, maybe it is a potential for higher interest units or whatever it is, but I think it needs it just needs to be treated differently and celebrated a little bit. And then another item that wasn't on Kalani's list were the balconies. So the balcony rails are, you know, there's quite a few of them as you go around the building. And I am concerned about students occupying these units and having these be visually porous and being able to see onto these balconies. They are going to be total junk collectors. You know, I mean, it's somebody from California that's moved, they're going to be storing their skis and bikes and bean bags, and everything is going onto these balconies as an overflow space. And so I just want some special attention paid to the materiality of those balcony rails, because it's not high-end Peloton renters, it's students. You know?
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Brendan. And if I may, Mr. Chair, our client with Landmark is on, and they can respond to that. They actually do have tenant guidelines. It's a very tightly managed community. They have these all around the country. So if Rob or Andrew can have a presenter role, they can speak to that quickly. It's a great point, because we know what that looks like.
I have a quick question that sort of tags onto this. Are there specific storage units that go with the units that are on a different grade, on below grade, or it doesn't sound like there are, but
There's not dedicated storage rooms throughout the building, and there's no below grade on the project due to the flood plain.
There
So
are
there's kind of,
occasional storage bays scattered
Mhm.
throughout the plan. There's a couple of units that have like leftover space off of the corridor that will be rented storage. So
Right.
it's not dedicated for each unit, but there are opportunities for it throughout the corridors.
yeah, I live across the street from exactly what Brendan is talking about. And when the building was built, there are storage units that were built in the basement, and the tenants are supposed to put their stuff there. And a few of them do, but most of them put it on the porch. And it is potentially a big problem. And this is affordable housing, so it's managed by Boulder Housing Partners, and they have their rules, and you have to remind them all the time that those are the rules, and so then they have to enforce them, and then the stuff disappears for a while, and then it comes back. So, and it's kind of seasonal, but there's a
hello, this is Kevin.
lot of stuff. That's a good,
Yes.
I think, really good point.
Hey, this is Andrew Costas from Landmark Properties, the applicant. Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, as Kevin was saying, we manage that through our lease documents. So in addition to a code of conduct, we have requirements that the tenants follow certain guidelines, and we manage that through our leases. So essentially, if they don't comply, they're at risk of losing their lease. And so we are well versed in this. It's something that a lot of communities we work in are worried about, and it's in our best interest to be a good neighbor. I don't know if anybody on DAB has seen the good neighbor agreement that we submitted alongside our site review submittal, but we are committing to a number of things in that agreement to make sure that we're operating this community in a way that is going to be accepted in the community. So storage of miscellaneous stuff on the balconies is not allowed.
Okay, thank you.
And then you guys have regular enforcement of this, or how does that get?
Yes, we have on-site
managed?
property management.
Okay.
And so If they walk around and they see it happening, the property manager will contact the resident and ask him to, remove it.
Okay. Brendan, anything else you want to add to your recommendations?
Not really. I mean, I think that there seems to be that the balcony treatment is the same in most cases, except for, I was looking at that on the south elevation, it looked like there's maybe some decorative vertical metal elements that make it a little bit different. It might be nice to be able to see some of that same design or detailing or articulation on this east facade or on the north. I just feel like the south is just hogging all of these great design moments.
That's a good point too. Okay, thank you. So Rory and Brendan, we can come back to you. I want to come back before you leave and see if you have anything to add, but let me see what Rory and Matthew have.
I think Mark's got his hand raised all politely over
No,
there.
you guys go. You guys go. I just wanted to get something in before we concluded, but you guys go. Go ahead.
Matthew, go for it. Did we lose Matthew? We may have lost him. I don't see him. Oh, he's joining in now.
Let me see if he's still on the list.
He just showed up. Matt, can you hear us?
I just promoted him to panelist. It'll take a second. It looks like he's trying to log back.
Yeah, I mean, as far as documenting my feedback, I just think globally the rigor with which the entire project site has been treated from a massing and articulation of building scale on the site has been very rigorous and well received. I think taking that same rigor to individual building development would be the next logical step of design development here.
Can you say more about that? Can you be a little more specific?
Yeah, I think, treatment, further architectural expression of programmatically varying spaces. And a review kind of project wide of the rhythm and the articulation of fenestration to break it down at least one step further. The logical places being corners, but also evaluating if kind of vertical versus horizontal subtlety can be incorporated.
Okay. I think I got that.
Matt, you with us?
Yeah, sorry about that technical difficulty.
Oh, you're good.
So Matthew, we were trying to get specific recommendations, sort of overall and as specific as you want to get.
Outside of the
outside of the four issues that we've kind of addressed.
Yeah, I think my two big things, and I'll be brief because they probably fall into what we've addressed. One is creating entrances, landscape entrances on the north between the two main alleys of the building. And I think some textural variation on the east-west bar, facing the north facade or of the north facade. Those are my two big things. The third, I just concur with the need to I think the northeast corner, because of the program lending itself to this is well articulated, and the program gives that opportunity. I think if you're going to have accessible parking on the northwest, something has to be done on the northwest corner of the building, to adapt to that just reality that, we're trying to, I think a lot of people are going to access the site from that entrance. And I think that corner of the building is a bit of a billboard right now. And it just needs something at the ground level to address people circulating from the west.
Todd, I think that's something we've all agreed on, is that the northwest corner should be treated more as an arrival beacon.
And if it means moving transformers to the east along that facade or something, I mean, easier said than done, I'm sure, but if it means making some accommodations to create something more interesting in that corner, which is the first thing everyone parking in this parking lot is going to see, I think, coming to a back of house garage door, if that could be mitigated, it'd probably be more attractive.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Or at a minimum, that same articulation could start at level 2 and give it and just give visually less emphasis on that service door and the transformers.
Okay.
And then I have kind of just a, as an overall comment for this project. And maybe we could go back to that view that we were just looking at from the southeast. Yes. I think, the reason why this project was put before us is because there was a height variance request. And when I was looking at the diagram that was showing the Harvest House, this project overlaid in 3 dimensions with the Harvest House, I understand that the 55 feet is starting from the low point in sight, which is very low. So the top of parapet of this building is actually not very high, and it's, as we saw in the diagram, it's not any higher than the primary structure of the Harvest House. However, I do think that what was successful in the Harvest House is that only a portion of that met the 55 feet. And then there was a lot of stepping and a lot of variation in height. I think, for example, building 1, the entire building is at the max height. I don't know if, and then as you go into phase 2 and 3, you have some step backs and some setbacks, and it just creates more interest. And I just would like to see that building 1 not be maxed out on every floor at every facade to that max height elevation. If that's what we're going for.
Okay.
I think the other thing I would add is, in a lot of ways, the discussion about the east facade is a direct reaction to it essentially being a street facing facade, even though it is separated by the parking lot. So I would, I guess, like to document that not only should the north facade be treated with kind of a design lens that one day it will be a front street facing facade, but acknowledging that this east facade is in a lot of ways a second and corner like property with a 28th Street facing facade.
Is there a recommendation that you have to go along with that?
I think just providing kind of the design nuance and subtlety to dignify a street facing facade.
Okay. Great, thanks. So, Mark, I think you were holding a comment.
Yeah, I just have one going back to my original question / comment in regard to the multi-use path on the south side of the building. And the way it's currently designed, I think is kind of reminiscent of the lawn between the library and the city building. And I find that to be successful because moving the multi-use path away from the creek has many advantages, some of them ecological for the creek, etc. But I want to make sure the applicant understands that because of the way Boulder has structured a lot of east-west traffic, commuters use that path at high frequency, high volume, and maybe inappropriately high speed. And I do not underestimate the use of that multi-use path by commuters. And so the radius and moving it away from the creek can't seem gratuitously out of the way. It's got to be just enough that you get the effect you want, but it can't seem like I'm really being diverted here just for a landscape architect's sort of whim. It's got to feel right, and it's got to acknowledge the volume of users. The other thing I would say is the edge of the creek, in conjunction with whatever city department really manages that, needs to be programmed so that as people use the creek edge, similar to, again, the city lawn, there are real structured and programmed places so that people go to those places and they don't damage the rest of the creek. Because if you just have it be a free-for-all, then the whole thing kind of gets damaged and falls apart. So people want to go to the creek. You have to make sure that they have a place to go to the creek, and that it's not particularly great for them to go other places. So that's my comment on the path, the multi-use path and the creek bank.
I think that's a really good point. My concern is that, you do have this wider multi-use path and then you have a shortcut. And I wonder if people are going to start just cutting through that onto the pedestrian path on their e-bikes, which are, we live really close to a bike path, and it is the speed at which those e-bikes are moving on those bike paths is frightening in terms of, residents trying to get down to that spot can be like crossing 4 lanes of traffic on a highway. It can be, and it, like you said, Mark, it can be very busy. And I do think you need to be careful about creating shortcuts for people to avoid having to do that circuitous loop to the north.
Yep. I think there's a balance there between getting it away from the creek and just making it feel like, why am I going over here when I really want to go this other way? So yeah, agreed.
I think that's a really good point too. I have a question about the bridge. Is that crossing of Boulder Creek, is that there
Yeah, and right now it sucks. You're coming high speed and then it's a hard left. So I think the
Hard left
radius,
and you, okay,
the radius is actually, I mean, I agree with what Mark's saying, like, you know, this shouldn't be a sightseeing tour. I think I ride that path to get to the office, so I'm cruising. But it looks much more pleasant as far as taking that turn without a 90-degree, and usually people collect there, so it's kind of a pretty dodgy moment on the trail right now.
so having that arc is more of a natural sort of bend.
For
That-
sure.
Yeah, so at least, I mean, Mark's point's well taken. I'm just thinking that bridge, if it comes across perpendicular to the creek, it sort of suggests this bigger arc rather than this sharp turn,
Yeah, exactly.
but not overly done.
That's definitely the reasoning we looked at doing that. I think as soon as you come off the bridge, if you're there in today's condition, it's really dangerous. I've almost gotten hit a number of times being a pedestrian with cyclists just flying by. So we were doing it more out of safety for pedestrians and for cyclists. I don't know if it's going to get people to slow down anymore, but I think it at least creates more sight lines and more opportunity for pedestrians to interface with cyclists and see that coming. So
Right.
We felt like we designed it to a level that was both going to be beneficial for pedestrians and cyclists kind of moving through on that path. I think that's a good point about making sure the creek path edge that's along the creek doesn't feel like a shortcut. So I think we can definitely re-examine that. I think the angles that the path kind of cuts back into the Boulder Creek Trail, it kind of jogs back in. I think hopefully that will serve as a deterrent, but we can look at that to make sure that we feel like it's serving its purpose.
Okay, great, thank you. So are there any other DAB comments or that we need to consider here or recommendations?
I'm just the only one while we're on the path. Mark, I'm curious if you guys on planning board chatted at all about like encampment opportunity here. This just looks like prime encampment real estate right now.
So I did not do the concept review or site review of this in 21. I was not on planning board yet. So I have nothing to say. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe Kalani remembers, but no, I don't remember.
We are just seeing, I mean, this whole path is littered with kind of vagrants and things. I guess a community eyes-on approach should probably be something that's considered, and it seems like you have in a lot of ways. The fact that it's more kind of open lawn can go either way. I mean, we see Central Park kind of becoming heavily populated at times. But we also see kind of the sticks and the brush as kind of long-term residences for some folks. Just something to be aware of if you're continuing discussions about articulating these beautiful green open spaces.
Okay, very good point. Deb, any other recommendations overall? No? Hearing none?
I think Amy's got her hand up though.
Who does? Oh, Amy, I'm sorry. Your
Yes.
screen is very busy in the background. I didn't see your hand there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rory. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Brendan's comment about the height at building 1. I know part of when we were looking at massing strategies, we have the setbacks at buildings 2 and 3, where we don't have the amenity space, and having the amenity space at building 1 is where we have more of the activated level 1 with larger storefront openings. And so having that variation for building 1, having a full height at building 1 in contrast to the setbacks at buildings 2 and 3 was something that we had looked at doing intentionally. And so I'm just wondering if your comment of having a level height across that whole building, if maybe adding some variation in parapet heights would help address your concern.
Well, we actually did talk about that on the project across the street. You know, is it something, is it a variation in parapet height? And in this case, I don't think that that's remotely a strong enough move. I mean, I appreciate the amenity space that you have, and I like the storefront treatment, and I like the ground level engagement from the interior space to the exterior space. We just don't see any of it from this east elevation. And to me, this is like this shot, this is your money shot. This is what's going to get a student to sign up to lease an apartment over here, as opposed to the options that they have across the street when they're coming into Boulder. And I just wonder if some reduction in it's just a very big mass. And I understand the move that was made for the amenity space on the ground level and appreciate that. I just, you know, like would love to see that program mirrored and flipped, and not only would the amenity space be engaging the property, but would also be engaging the public. It's very private on the interior of that project.
And I'll add that we have the multi-use path that we're activating as well. So just going back to the 360 buildings that we're working around, in addition to 28th Street frontage, we also have the multi-use path for pedestrian and bike activity for the general public. And so we do have amenities on that elevation.
I think if we had the opportunity to move, the entire mass closer to 28th, it would be a stronger reason to flip those components. The fact that we've got this 120 feet of parking, and we can't do anything else with this. It's part of what drove that. We said, let's choose what is more apt to be the active use, kind of following the intent of the code, rather than just saying, well, there's the street, put the storefront there. That is how that evolved. It's a great comment.
This is where the parents start thinking about whether they wrote the right check. Yes. Okay, good. Very good points there. Anything else? If not, I think we can close this portion of the meeting and let our applicants take off.
Todd, did you, before you do that, did you summarize the staff key issues, the recommendations from the staff key issues?
What I would like to do, Kalani, is let them go and then do that, then come back with the board.
They might want to hear those, just if the applicant wants to stay for the summarization, they will be part of the minutes. So you'll have those there.
Well,
we're flexible either way. I do want to echo Chris's thanks for the great discussion and feedback. Your understanding of it is really spot on, and we appreciate the dialogue. So it's your choice, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we can get this. We can get you the recommendations fairly quickly before we put them in the minutes, I think. But I don't want. I have quite a few notes on some of the stuff that we talked about, and so I want to make sure that I'm capturing what people are truly recommending versus something that they may be just articulating. So I would prefer to just let you guys go and then have go back through these notes with the DAB members, if that works.
Yeah, and if there's any, I mean, we're happy to excuse most of our team. It might make sense for one of us to hang out just in case there's any questions that come up, clarification. We don't need
Okay.
everybody here.
Yeah.
That'd be okay with us.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
We can kind of go off video so you guys have more privacy, I guess. That's helpful.
And so we can eat our pizza.
Right.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Man, I want pizza. Remember, Kailani, you guys used to bring pizza in when we met in person.
There was a day
Mhm.
before 2020 in COVID.
Way back in ancient history.
Gosh, that might be a reason. to
And
go to my
a lot of
house.
bags of chips.
Little
Oh,
bags.
I think Cindy had a snack bowl too, and
Okay. Has anybody besides me been taking notes?
Steel
I
trap
just-
over here.
Mental notes.
Yeah, okay. Well, we talked about a lot of stuff. I would like to go back and kind of revisit the notes that I took on each one of these and see if they're still on the radar or if they've somehow been incorporated into something else. So I don't want to summarize stuff that maybe isn't necessary. So so on the first issue, which was the north, basically the north facing facade, the big question there is how do we sort of make that more inviting to as a street facing facade? And the points that came up was can we create an entry in that basically a landscape entry, which I think is the way Matthew put it, which I thought was pretty well stated. Can there be more of an architectural entry on the north? Can there be more of a landscape entry on the north? Mark suggested visiting the 34th Street south of Valmont as an example of something. I'm not familiar with it, but that's something that that
That's
might
transit. He's talking about Transit Village.
Okay, Transit Village, all right. So that's one issue. That's like that one issue is the recommendation is we need to make more of an entrance on the north facade, either and a landscape entrance and creating more architectural interest on that side that begins to sort of articulate an entrance from the north.
Yeah, I think what we were saying, so the guidelines are very clear that
Mhm.
if you need entry from the street facing facade. And I
Right.
think the discussion was such that if there's not opportunity to have direct building entries from the north street facing facade, then let's further celebrate and articulate the landscape entries.
Right. Okay, so that is a clear recommendation. Now, the other recommendation that sort of fits into this, I think, is that Kevin was talking more about articulation of the base of the buildings. And there's something there around that. And this may be changing. This came up, I think, in some other discussion around making the north facade more interesting architecturally through texture, through design. And that it's just this sort of flat face at this point. And
Yeah,
so
I mean-
it seems like there's opportunities to do that in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I think part of the discussion was right now that we have a whole series of programmatic elements that need to be on the back of a building.
Right.
Trash and service and whatever that might be. It also needs to be at grade and accessible from street level. So I understand programmatically why they need to put those elements, the transformers, the trash collection, all that has to be on that side of the building. But if there's programmatically in the elevation, there's no distinction between the sort of service base elements and then the residential units above it, that I think if there's an opportunity to to visually and through materiality separate those two elements on that north facade. That right now it's just, grade to parapet, one material.
Right, okay. So in terms of materiality, I think Rory said, increase the variation east to west, and I assume top to bottom, break up the rhythm a bit on that whole north facade. This is separate from creating the entrance, but it's the goal there is to make the north side more of a street facade, street facing facade.
That might have been more my opinion, and then Matthew
Okay.
seemed to have a differing opinion, and which, is one great thing about AB is that we don't have to agree on these things.
Correct. What I do think, Matt and Brendan, I'd be curious your opinion, because reaching consensus is always more helpful for the applicant, or I guess planning board when they're reviewing, or city council. But
Yeah.
I personally, Matt, you're echoing kind of a long-standing kind of perspective, DAB perspective, that we're not, subtlety is key.
Mhm.
So we don't want to start linking windows with different colors and changing material direction for just the hell of it, just to create visual noise. So achieving everything that Brendan is speaking to as far as creating kind of interest, but doing it subtly.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right,
I concur with that.
okay.
I mean, we were trying to do an application to the city of Erie, and it was like every 25 feet you have to have 3 elements change in the facade of the building. And it just makes it
It's a joke.
busy.
Right.
We're not looking for busy, we're just looking for
Interest.
thoughtfully
Subtle
detailed.
Yeah.
variation and interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Brendan, were you with? Oh, sorry, Matt. Go ahead.
No, I was just, I feel like the context of that are varying perspectives on that. From my point of view, it has to do more structurally with what's happening at that point of the building. I think that corner of the building needs the most help.
The
we're not talking about the northwest corner yet.
Okay.
Are you? Yeah, so hold on to that thought. So yes, because I did want to come back to, let's see. Yes, that did come up, but we'll get to that. Rory
Yeah.
mentioned I think what you called this sort of Asian inspired sort of grade changes to create a buffer.
I want, yeah, exactly. I think, well, so again, we're under key issue A right now. And the response that hopefully we're crafting for staff is in response to the comment that the relationship to the new street, because it's gonna be a new street. Right now, it's a
Right.
shitty alley, but it's gonna be a new street. It says provide recommendations to help mitigate the visual impact of the service areas. So I think Matt's northwest corner is relevant because
Yeah.
that's the garage, or that's the garage door for the garbage, the transformers, etc. And improve human scale elements like entries, which I think both Brennan and Matthew are touching on, between the landscape entries and then breaking down, some of the monotony of the facade treatment. So that's really what to put a whatever summary to that. Those are the elements here that we should focus on. So
Okay, all right.
and I think because this is not the podium comment.
Right. Yeah, we're not
Yeah.
there yet. So then the next issue is, which we sort of we're transitioning into, was dealing with the accessibility. And that's when we started talking about that northwest facade in that northwest corner. So one of the recommendations on the access is that the accessible parking and entry need to coincide.
Correct.
Is what I wrote down.
Correct.
However they do that, whether they move it or whether they try to accommodate it there.
Yes, I think that 100%. That's 100%. That's
Okay.
put a period behind it. I think then what was born out of that discussion was that back to point A, so this is where they bleed a little bit. The northwest corner seems like a perfect opportunity to address comment A by adding more interest and front street facade development, and address the accessible parking and access with some minor program reconfiguration
Right.
at the northwest corner.
I mean,
So the
if you're driving on Folsom, that hill really starts to climb on Folsom going up to CU. And
Right.
so that corner in reality is pretty sunken. So I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see sort of a shot from Folsom, how much of that corner you'd actually even be able to see. So that corner is a little less important, although I do agree with the comment about the maybe opportunity for more fenestration or just different fenestration on that corner. But it is you come off Folsom Street and you go down sort of this ramp of a road to get to that backside. And so it is pretty sunken.
It is. I'm looking at it right now. It's not quite the steep section of the hill, but it's just elevated above that park. I think that it will be an entry, because eventually, like once this becomes Olson Drive, fast forward 10 years, they redeveloped Joanne Fabrics and it's now has a street. So now the north property is going to front this street and maybe have storefronts and things. And then west of Folsom, there's discussion that the university is going to take what is currently, north of the field house. It's like these old school, it's called Newton Court. It's like these old school, like bush hammered concrete, aggregate exposed housing development, but that will be redeveloped. So basically Olson Drive, this new road, quote unquote, that is kind of being created here, will essentially link 28th Street through Folsom to another potentially residential or mixed use development west of Folsom. So I guess the idea would be that if, how many people would be taking Folsom and turning onto this new Olson Street, and this northwest corner is your arrival, this is your arrival beacon, right? Like I'm going to pick up a friend, I'm going to do whatever, and feeling like you're actually arriving at the front of a building, I guess is what I was hoping.
Well, and maybe we don't know that at this point, but the point that we're trying to make sort of 2 points. One is that, and we'll get to, I'm jumping around a little bit, but this east facade is really important as a frontage, as a street facing facade, as is that northwest corner. So the northwest corner, what I also have here is a treated northwest corner as an entry beacon, that it really has to be celebrated, and that maybe there needs to be some programmatic changes in order to make that happen.
But I think the tier of importance would be, southeast, northeast, and then northwest in terms of celebrating corners.
Southeast, northeast, and northwest, celebrated corners. Okay.
Or northeast, southeast, northwest. I don't know, but the east seems to be. I mean, I do think eventually that will become a node, but we were tasked of making with 3 buildings between Pearl Street and Walnut Street, of making an alley into a Lowry Lane, and it's like lipstick on a pig. It's still an alley, it's just been a very hard task. And maybe in 30 years, it'll look less like an alley, but I sort of, my concern is the same road is really just an alley service access in the near future.
I don't disagree. I think Kailani, you're kind of visceral response in our pre-meeting of like, this is like, because you're on the city planning, you know, kind of leg of it. Of just, this is how it happens. Somebody does a nice job, and then the people that redevelop the property across the street are like, holy shit, look at this context that we're working with. That's
Yeah,
crazy, because
that's obviously the goal.
yeah.
And it's planned in the connections plan too. So the long range plans through the BVRC and other connections. This is kind of marked out as a local street and not an alley. And so you're right, it does, that's how it happens. And it happens with the Catalyst project like this. And it may be 5 years, maybe 10 years, but we do plan forward for 20 years, looking for these improvements.
Right.
I guess,
So
so I
awkward
don't
in between, right? It's really awkward in the in-between phase, and hopefully there's a way to kind of ease into that, but we do want to try to make those improvements.
I mean, right now, that road, it looks like you're
you're not allowed to turn on it. It says do not enter. You're not even supposed to come down.
Right. It looks like you're just in a parking lot. So I think now if we're making it a road, yeah, people probably will use it more. I might use it more.
I use it all the time. Even though it says do not enter. I guess so. I think we're reaching consensus here. I guess I would just caution putting the need to put kind of a hierarchy on these corners. I would just.
I agree. I don't agree with that ranking necessarily. I don't find the southeast corner particularly offensive. It's somewhat hidden from 28th Street. It's facing the creek. So I would, if it's okay with everyone, I wouldn't record a priority necessarily. I think a general thought.
Yeah, I wasn't picking up on a priority, but so the northwest corner is really more, is designed now as a
back of house. It's service, and that's addressing comment A.
Right.
Is that how can the north facade not be a service-driven facade?
Right, and the corner needs to, and that northwest corner needs to be celebrated.
Correct. Well,
right.
I wouldn't, celebrated might be strong too. It needs to have some, I don't know, some design intent there rather than just utility corner. It is okay. It is the first corner 100 people are going to see when they go drive in there. So I think it is fairly important.
It should be articulated as a street-facing arrival component of the facade.
I don't think it needs to be celebrated.
Street-facing arrival.
Yeah, it needs to be appropriately detailed because it's not at the alley or back of house.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you.
Would it be helpful to, do you need me to point out, do you want to see the particular criteria that talks about this?
I have it right here.
Okay, the 5.2A on orient the building to the street.
Orient the building to the street. This is straight out of BVRC criterion. Orientation and entrances. The building should address the street and not, quote, turn its back to the public. Orient the main facade to the street and provide an entrance or entrances on the street side. If the parking is located behind the building, an entrance may also be needed on that side of the building. Also consider providing an entrance facing any activity area, transit stop, or major off-street pedestrian path located near the building. If the building is long or large, more than one entrance may be needed on the front facade, or entrances may be needed on a number of building sides. In general, for walkability, building or store entrances should occur at least approximately every 150 feet. And these are happening every 156 feet, these courtyard entries that we've been talking about. Yeah. So we're there, but that's the criteria with which this is being kind of reviewed.
Yeah, and I think given that description of the criteria, that is an area. I mean, they have 4 accessible parking spots there for one. That's one reason that's good enough.
I think the other component is 5.3A, service areas, Kailani, where it says locate service areas to minimize visibility. Locate trash, storage, loading, and truck parking to minimize visibility from the street or sidewalk and the building entrances. This can be difficult to achieve, blah, 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 it goes on. But I think this is all kind of in support of this north facade. It does turn a corner. So you could argue it's no longer the north facade, but right now it's trash, transformer, and utility entry. So it's
Yes.
it's completely out of sync with the spirit and the letter of the criteria.
And I would say for the 4 key issues that staff's put together, if you have a consolidated recommendation for say A and B, we are okay with that. If it makes sense to group those together, because those 4 really play off of each other, right? The elevation design, the kind of pedestrian portion, the entries, the wayfinding, and the kind of podium and human scale buffering, they're all of the same kind of spirit in that sense.
Yeah, so basically A is the north facade that's to that criteria. B is the accessible entries, which I think, Todd, you summed that up very nicely. And then C is a diagram, which kind of threw us off a little bit, Kailani. It's not an actual task. I think it jumps to D. We get to the flood constraints. That's the podium comment.
Right. So you want to move there?
C is the wayfinding with the kind of the improvements on those entries. So that
But
may have been embedded with your other entry on that north corner. Some of the recommendations you have there.
Well, yeah.
Correct, exactly.
So we have a recommendation regarding accessibility. But in terms of wayfinding, is that a separate issue, or is that only an issue if the accessibility is around the building?
Well, I think one, they clarified basically, there was 2 accessible issues.
Right.
One, they
It's just
clarified
on
was
one side.
accessible. So now we're back to the northwest corner.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's why it's bleeding into the north facade, because if you
Yeah.
got rid of the service component that's against the spirit, then you could potentially put an entry there.
Right.
And that, they had the stair, if you recall, so maybe they could get a ramp, or maybe, I don't know. Without
think-
designing it.
One other comment that I would like to make on that north facade is the transformers. We have the, a series of transformers as you're marching down that road, and the elevation behind it becomes stark and somewhat windowless. And maybe there's opportunity for screening of the transformers, whether that's landscape screening or some type of a decorative, built fence element. But I do think that as part of that service component driving the design of that north elevation, the transformers are problematic and they need to be addressed.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Kevin wants to, Kevin has a comment. Is that okay
yes.
with you guys?
Yeah,
Sure.
thanks so much, everyone.
Sure.
I appreciate that this is difficult to wordsmith. And one of the things that's difficult about this is we kind of see them all as primary elevations. When we're looking at that northwest corner of building 3, both of those are equally important. And we chose to put that around to the north, both because of the floodplain constrictions, but more the parking dimensions on that side. So, I mean, if you think about it as if we're concerned about vehicle traffic headed east as it comes in on this new Olson Drive, it's on one face or the other through there. And it does need to serve the building. So, locating those things down to the south isn't an option in terms of serviceability, and it's not something you want on the south side. You're struggling with the very thing we did, which is they're all primary facades. So I just put in a request to be cautious about how we understand the intent that we need to improve that northwest corner, but if we get into recommending relocating transformers, I think the flood engineer is probably going to jump off of a convenient bridge.
Yeah, and I mean, and I said that in the beginning, that I wholeheartedly understand why the service elements have been placed where they are, based on grade and program and city services and all of that. And I understand that we need transformers. I just think we just need to be there just needs to be a distinction between those service elements and then the residential component, and maybe there's a way to dress up.
Yeah,
some-
and we agree with the intent of that. I'm just trying to encourage the language to not be constrictive as to what we do. Allow us to study that if we could, please. It's a great, it absolutely is an area that needs further study.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
so
mean, would it
much
be,
for letting me
would it be,
interject.
yeah, no problem. I guess, would it be fair, guys, to just say that, transformer locations and adequate screening should be evaluated with the reevaluation of the north facade?
Sure,
Yes.
totally. Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you all. Appreciate
That's
it.
very helpful. So shall we move on to the exposed podium, which sort of bleeds into the fourth point too, I guess. So,
Yeah, I think you can combine the
yeah.
last.
So what I picked up on here was I was a little bit confused about what we were really talking about here. So softening, while softening the podium, exposed podium, you have an opportunity to create new interest and effect all around, basically. But then we talked mostly about the east facade.
In my, I think that what happened is, in the same way that they addressed the accessibility entrance for building 2, I think part of that plinth or that platform problem was addressed and resolved in the knuckles, in the courtyards and in the fingers. I think that they successfully addressed some of that with grade change and landscaping and elevation, and it doesn't feel like it's sitting on this giant podium when you're looking at it from the south. So I wonder
Right.
if some of that was addressed in design between submittal and today's meeting.
Well, I guess to link these two comments, basically we're being asked to review the amount of podium that is exposed, and that's particularly on the north facade. And that amount of podium can be mitigated with, creative landscaping and grading and potentially planters, landscape design.
Right.
Then E is talking about the landscape buffer zone for the units that's primarily on the east and west. So I think basically we were talking about strategies on the north where, could they work in some, unique kind of grading bubbles or, steep grading elements and couple that with planters that create rhythm and change height or something to help further the north facade interest and the podium comment. And then that naturally became the discussion as we went to the east of the building as well. So I think in other words, Todd, the way to address hiding the podium is with landscape screening, which is also what comment 4 or E is asking.
Right. Yes, and I get that. What I'm kind of observing though is that they're really constrained on the east and west side in what they can do in terms of landscaping.
Correct. And the north for that matter.
But I said this earlier in the meeting that they have come up with some great solutions on the south, on those interior courtyards of how to articulate those elevations and bring interest. And there's great details in there, and there's a change in, like, for example, just the balcony rails, and they have applied materials on the facade. I'm not really sure what they are, but they're just decorative and they're interesting, and they have some solutions within the project that can just be extracted. It doesn't all have to be through landscape. But I think that that plinth can be also resolved with some of the good architectural moves that were made in other parts of the building.
So Brendan, you're still talking about the
East.
podium though, right?
I'm talking about the podium. I think the podium that's still problematic in my mind is the north and the east.
The north and the east, okay, all right. So, but the recommendation, if I could draw one out of what you said, is to apply treatments that are being used in the courtyard to the exterior part of the building.
Yes, the
Okay.
perimeter of the building should be treated more similarly to the interior courtyards.
Okay,
From
so
from a landscape and buffer, from a landscape design and buffering components.
And an architectural design.
Okay, now, so when you say the architectural design, are you still talking about the podiums? Or are we moving up now into the facade?
That's into
That
more
seems to
facade,
me to
right?
be a separate issue.
Yes and no. I mean, I think that there's some moves with storefront windows and, you know, different glazing treatments. I think that there are I think that I just don't want the architecture to be forgotten. I don't think that this podium problem is only solved with landscape.
Yes, correct. That's the distinction right there, Todd,
Okay.
is that the podium component can be solved with both landscape and architectural treatments.
Yes.
The comment E or 4, or whatever we're calling it, the buffering, they'd like to see more of a landscape buffer to the parking lots. That is
Right.
strictly landscape components.
Yes.
But to be specific to recommendations to staff. But then our general discussion afterwards then picked up the desire to see more architectural treatments.
Okay.
on these facades.
And I'd
Okay.
also like to add that the buffer isn't necessarily the grade plane of the buffer. While they are limited in depth, I think we can play with some variation potentially in height of the planter beds or the landscaping itself.
Okay. Okay, so apply treatments being used in the courtyards to the exterior in both architectural and landscape solutions or opportunities. Okay. All right. And then if we're talking about that specifically, so then, okay, there's in terms of just the buffer, the last point, the last issue, dealing with the buffer on the east and west side. There are certain things that they can do through trying to soften the podium, but there's limitations on how much room they have to plant in terms of removing parking spaces or creating more of a planting bed between the building and the sidewalk. They don't have a lot to work with, and they can't push it more towards 28th Street because they're going to run into flooding constraints. So they're very limited, it seems like, in what they can do in terms of buffer on the east side. I'm not sure about the west side.
So
West side seems to be constrained as well.
Yeah,
So
they
the
said more constrained.
east side has a 5-foot planting buffer between the
Right.
sidewalk and the building, and the west side has a 2-foot planting buffer. And I think what staff is basically saying very clearly says staff would like to see more landscape buffer. Now,
Yes.
I think what we're debating here is, do we think those dimensions are enough? I mean, you know, what the applicant was saying is that, hey, by the time we get a minimal parking lot off of 28th and in a way that's designed with grade so that it's not a disastrous, you know, during a flood event, we resulted in 5 feet. And then same thing from the west. But I guess, again, these constraints are self-inflicted. I mean, could you steal 6 inches out of every courtyard and in between the buildings and increase it? Sure. Do we really, is it worth the brain damage? And I guess that is probably ultimately what we're debating here, is that one, I guess what I thought I was saying on the east facade is that I think 5 foot's plenty. And that if they
Okay.
get more creative with planters and sloping grades and things that, and the plant material, which they kept saying, obviously it's hard to articulate in their model, I get that would be adequate. I guess the question I have for you guys is a 2 foot planting strip. I mean, staff is saying that we would like to see more landscape buffer. To me, that's a quantifiable request, not a quantitative, not better landscaping buffer. They want to see more landscaping buffer.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I don't-
But there's quite a buffer between 28th Street and the parking lot. I mean,
5 feet, 5 feet. Oh, sorry, from the building. So they're saying from the so
parking
ground
lot's
floor
28
residential
feet.
units. They're saying from the inside of ground floor residential units along the parking lot walkways. That's a very specific comment. So if you're in your unit, ground floor, and you're either east or west facing to the parking lot, they would like to see more landscape buffer.
Mhm.
I
is what
mean,
staff is saying.
when you're at 2 feet, it's not a landscape buffer. Let's just be honest.
Correct.
There's no landscape that's growing in 2 feet next to the foundation and the sidewalk. So, you know, just to look at it from a different perspective, like, is that a crime? Like, there's a lot of urban development that's right up to the lot line. It's right at the sidewalk. And they manage to have recessed balconies and it all works. It doesn't work great. It's not a chateau in the landscape. It's a ground floor unit next to the parking. And that is a very common, if not unfortunate, urban reality. So my recommendation would be, instead of trying to call it a 2 foot landscape buffer, design it as something that's not a landscape buffer. You know, design it as a wall or a seating wall or something that treats it for the space it is, and not try to, you know, say that it's landscape, because it's not.
So
That to me would be a more realistic approach than us telling them to move the building 5 feet east, which, you know, is, I think, above and beyond what we'd be willing to ask. You know, ask
So,
anyone to
Matthew,
do.
are you suggesting that, if I could put this into words, evaluate other buffer solutions for the west side?
Yeah,
yeah, and
Okay.
I have to actually leave here in just a minute. My final say on that, on the east landscape buffer, the 5 foot one, I think ties more importantly into the podium conversation, that when you get to the south side of that elevation, it's there's quite a, I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's several feet of podium before you get to the first level. And so I think that, yes, some treatment needs to happen in that area to cover the podium. But I agree with you all that it doesn't necessarily have to just be plants. I think it can be, you know, this is where we talk about like a landscape architecture that they did. If I'm looking at the site plan, at the entry to the you know, the sales center, they did some very nice planting walls and great elevation changes in the planting itself. And I think that while it's mini, it'll be significantly smaller. There's some opportunity for landscape architecture to happen in that.
Okay, Brendan, I know you have to go. Do you want to say any more about the east facade?
No, I think.
Okay.
I mean, I
'Cause I
just think it needs to be celebrated more, and I can.
Yes.
I can leave it at that.
Okay. All right. I think that works.
All right. Sorry to cut this short, guys.
Oh, you're good.
No problem. Thank
Get
you.
out of this one. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so that should bring us up to these sort of final recommendations that you all made. One other thing that Matthew mentioned on dealing with the west side, talking about subtle variation in the scale, materials, texture. You didn't want to see big sweeping differences. You wanted to see more subtle differences in texture and things like that. Not big sweeping color differences.
My recommendation is just based on a preference that, you know, I don't think big bulky buildings are improved by patching on different colors. Without a change in relief of the facade, I think that actually is pretty bad looking. So that's a context, and that's my personal feeling. Practically, I think you summed it up well, Todd. I think what I would recommend if I were articulating it is you look for some chances to provide variation in materials, not necessarily the color, you know, by playing with the scale of the material and the panel system.
Right.
And I think it can be further summed up by just saying,
yeah, that would be too specific.
Yeah, introduce more more variety and interest.
Yep. Okay. So then moving on to your more general recommendations. There's a little bit of repetitiveness here, but Brendan talked about articulation of the major corners. 1 and 3 for sure. She mentioned the balconies. And the potential problem of having them be places that collect junk, which I think what she was getting at is that if you could somehow hide that through the design of the balcony structure, that might be helpful. But that's
I was less concerned with that. I mean, I own a condo and I'm on the HOA board, and we do quarterly walks, and people get fined if they don't clean their shit up.
And Andrew mentioned the landmark being the property manager and having a code of conduct and all of that. So I think that's about as good as we can do there.
I think under the general kind of DAB discussion recommendations, I think approaching the project with a finer scale of development, and like it goes off of what I was saying about how like the entire project I think is very well conceptualized. I just don't think they haven't gone far enough with the scale of it. So now like, these building blocks are being identified. It still looks very diagrammatic to me. Like again, the entire north facade is one material. I mean, it's 2 scales of that one material, but it's one material for 500 feet. So I think
so taking some of the architectural expressions from the interior on the south side and applying some of that to the exterior facades. As I think you said, the south is hogging the design moments.
That was
someone said that. I thought that was a good.
That was Brendan. Yeah.
I
think I think just further articulation of the mass and character of the buildings.
Okay. And then Matthew talked about the landscape entrance on the north. I think you were sort of summarizing texture variation on east and west facing and north facades. And finally, the northwest corner. So you re-articulated that. And let's see if there's anything else.
Furthering the programmatic distinction.
Furthering the programmatic distinction.
Yep. Right now, the only signal that there's a public program is just a bigger storefront window system. There's no sort of base plinth materiality. There's no massing move. There's no like canopies or, you know, things that would further articulate the programmatic distinctions
Okay,
beyond just larger windows.
beyond larger windows. Okay,
Do you agree with that, Matthew?
Get into my mute button, yeah. Yeah,
Roger, can,
I think I think that area still looks like a Revit model or SketchUp model. You know, I think there's a whole level of detailing there that we're not seeing that potentially could make it look great. But in general, yeah, I agree. There's a couple window systems I just didn't understand. One is the big storefront, and then somewhere adjacent, there's like a ribbon system.
Yeah.
I think there's a language to the storefronts that because there's several, it detracts from all of them. I would almost feel like, you know, pick one of those languages. The language of the whole development is the punched opening. So I feel like, and you know, no shade to the designers. I feel like storefronts are very difficult to design and they tend to come in later in the design. And this looks like the first, okay, pop in a storefront system. To make that a comment, I would, you know, just concur with you. I think it needs to be developed.
I
okay,
like it.
That was
All
a
right.
lot of editorial for like a very little comment.
But this is what we do, dude. Well, welcome to DAP.
Yeah, and then Mark mentioned, and I think everybody agreed that he was talking about the path. Not creating a, as it comes across the bridge, not creating an opportunity for people to shortcut. Because they
Yeah.
don't want to make the big arc, they turn
Yeah.
and go.
Yes, that was a two-part comment, like prevent the shortcut
Yeah,
and further evaluate the depth with which the arc enters the property. Because this is, you know, it's an efficient transit corridor. And so, you know, while it's nice to kind of have variety and bring the path up, I think the idea is like find the balance between a more interesting and bridge turn, but
right.
not so much that you're creating kind of undue travel.
Yeah,
Can I just say as an aside, I like the move of
Me
bringing
too.
traffic into the site. I think it makes that public green more effective than if the path went along the creek and you just had a public green and then the buildings.
I agree.
You know, so I wouldn't want to word the final comment in a way that discourages them from maintaining that kind of mixing of the.
yeah, I agree too.
overlay.
I do think that experiencing that on a bicycle, it's easier to navigate that bigger arc than it is if you're on foot. Because if you get to that point, you're crossing the bridge and you're looking, you can see where you need to go,
Yeah.
and you don't want to walk all the way up to the building and then back down. You're just going to make that turn.
Yeah.
So on foot, I think it's potentially a problem.
But is that a problem? I mean, people are gonna go occupy the green. Or you think they're gonna turn it into a trail?
But I guess it depends on what they're doing. If they're commuting, they may not be walking. If you're walking and just enjoying your outing, you might not cut the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's all I have.
So we got the corners, those were caught in a broad comment. I think just the general comment of further articulating the building. I don't think we're suggesting they link windows vertically or horizontally or any of that. We're just saying generally just reevaluate how to add another level of articulation. So I think we've covered it all. It's just a lot of building.
Okay. That it is. Okay, so now I think we can end this part of the discussion. So I want to really thank, let's see how many people we still have on here. We have 10 people who are still participating, and 5 of them, well, 4 of us, because Brendan had to go, but if there's still several people on here, I really thank everybody for hanging in there. I really thank the applicant for taking the time to sort of walk us through this and get down into the weeds on as many things as we were able to. And I think going back to our first comments, I think that one of the things that I would take away from this is that this really is a very challenging project, and you guys have done a great job. So feel good about that, and we will get you these comments as soon as we can. I think you probably have articulated them and probably written them down better than I have, certainly. So I think you know what sort of what we're recommending, and but we will get them in writing as well. So thanks again for your time and your energy.
Right on.
Come on
guys.
back, Kevin, if you want to.
Are we good? Are we?
Sorry. Well, the bikers on this will appreciate that I'm finishing the call while biking across downtown. So
Oh, okay.
I just want to
Good.
say thanks again.
Yes, thank you,
Yeah, I
Kevin.
thought you were coming back, so that's fine.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it
Kevin.
all. Thank you.
I just
Yeah,
want to
thank
do
you.
something under matters real quick, if we can.
Yeah.
All right, what do we got on board matters?
So for some scheduling things, but I'd like to talk a little bit about, because it's better for us to talk about the review and make improvements in little bits. And so moving forward, I would strongly recommend that these summarizations are done at the end of each topic area, because it does cause a little bit of kind of circular revisiting of the items. And that in itself took an hour and 15 minutes. So
The
if we can,
summarization did?
the re-summarization. So we
Right.
spent a significant portion of time re-summarizing things that were already summarized.
My only comment, Kailani, would be that particularly on this project where
Yeah.
all of the comments or the task priorities kind of bled into each other, that we were discovering solutions for the first priority item while discussing the fourth one.
Well, and that's, if we want to do that, summarizing them in a bundle, but we then moved into very detailed ones that we also summarized again just now.
Got
And
it.
so what I want to see in what would be helpful is if we're efficient in the summarization of where you're at. And if you want to bundle all the ones that staff has in one section, totally fine. And then go through and we can, because the ones we did that were very specific to each one of you are much easier to record through the minutes without even having to summarize. Like if Matthew has individual recommendations, like you guys did this time, we can do those kind of quickly without having to go back through and re-summarize those on top of it. So I would suggest doing that. And then I would also suggest is maybe it's helpful to break the note taking up between all of you. Like everybody gets a chance to kind of summarize one portion, because I think it'll give one Todd a break, and you guys tend to help each other summarize anyways. And so maybe if there's 3 or 4 questions, each one of you takes one and does the summarization. That might be helpful. I don't know, Todd, what do you think about that?
I'm fine with that. I think the challenge that I have that just kind of came to me at this very moment was that if what we're trying to do is get recommendations, so that, I guess that raises the question for me, why do we need to get it to summarize it if the goal is to get the recommendation?
We're getting.
If those two things are, I guess if those are different, if a summarization and recommendations are different, which it sounds like they are.
I don't need, what we take is action minutes. And so the action minutes, what we used to have is, very complicated kind of a record of every single input
Right.
from each board member. And it led to a lot of competing things that applicants had a hard time resolving, or that planning board had a hard time understanding what's the ultimate kind of recommendation. And
Right.
so for the consolidated recommendations, it was part of an ask from planning board on that we summarize what Dad was trying to say. And those recommendations are usually kind of what the consolidated group feels about something. Now, there's always going to be things like if there's an outline kind of disagreement on something, we should note that too. But the recommendations are really, what are those big moves that we need to bring forward to planning board and to the applicant so they have them there and they're not trying to resolve competing recommendations.
Okay, so I guess what I'm thinking is that I feel like I could, what I was trying to do is to really capture the details of the recommendations that were being made.
Yeah.
And not this sort of overarching summary. The overarching summary, I think I could probably do. Lauren did it really well. I think I could do it, but it would be very general.
I think that's okay though, because I think I mean, without us designing the building ourselves, we're never going to be able to say like, use a 8x4 brick pattern and space the windows accordingly. It's basically the stuff that's like, I always imagine, because reading our minutes, obviously I had quite a few edits on the last call because I was putting myself in the shoes of Mark, who's not a trained design professional and who has to basically say, okay, SAR architects came back to us and they changed these 10 things that they were very specifically telling us they changed.
Mm-hmm.
How does this relate to what Dab wanted to see? Not that Matthew is personally interested in subtlety, right? Like that it's just that and if I'm SAR, I want to be able to go and say, okay, hey, planning board, here were the 5 issues that staff outlined for us. We went to Dab. And on issue 1, they said, create more variety and interest and reevaluate the location of the utilities on the north facade. Please see these revised facades. We've moved transformers 3 foot off of all corners. We've had screening elements. We swapped the garage with the maintenance barn. We added a fucking entry there, et cetera. And then they can go, cool. And then they go to point 2. So we're basically just trying to create a Cliff Notes roadmap.
Yeah. And it's intent, not detail, right?
Yes.
It's intent, not detail. And part of our inclination is in our discussion is very detail oriented. The summary does have to be conceptually oriented because they're never going to come back with the specific details that we recommended. It's just not going to happen because the project is so complex. There are things we don't know. So I think the guiding philosophy for this summary, whether we do it concurrent to the discussion or after everyone leaves the meeting, really has to distill a content that is intentional, but also interpretable.
Yeah.
Yes, by lay people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do, it's really helpful to learning off of the last time we did this and the applicant left after you guys summarized. There was a lot of questions. So it's good to have at least 1 or 2 people from their team. But just like planning board, this is your deliberation time. And so you don't want a lot of interruptions, right? You want to be able to talk and go through the words, how you want those words to be characterized. So what Kevin had said was helpful, but I mean, in general, it's good to have them there taught in the background, just so they can hear the discussion and it's not like a surprise after the whole other, just when you were really working with them and going through the design on the facades, so.
I think it'll also, in our introduction, I think we should include a note for whatever outline, Todd, you're following. So the positive thing is obviously being well received. The fact that we all
Yeah.
get on and say something nice. I think we also need, because Kevin's response at the end, he was very fearful of the specific language that we were about to submit to planning board. But we're not quasi judicial, and I think we should remind all applicants after that positive piece, before we like as the hinge to the criticism, to just remind them that, like, you know, we are an advisory board by nature. Nothing we say is quasi judicial, and we will be providing general recommendations for planning board to evaluate with your resubmittal.
Yeah.
And I found the one or two times you guys had mentioned, we're gonna give you a lot of recommendations, and some of these things you're gonna find out through your revisions that they may or may not work. And but we want you to take these in the intent and that part, that they really grab the intent of what you're talking about. Cause that was on the project that was at Liquor Mart. They came back and said it was really helpful for Dab to say that, to give us some ideas, but also give us a little bit of flexibility on how to approach that, because we had to problem solve.
Of course, yes.
Building code issues or, material issues, so that was helpful for them too.
I feel like we crushed this one, guys. How about you?
I thought it was one of your better like one of the best reviews you've had in a long time. And I think once we can nail the summary for this too, or the recommendation kind of consolidation, this was good, especially for the scale of the project.
Yeah, I'm still, I guess I'm still confused, but I'm not sure what I'm confused about. To me, I knew that based on all the notes that I took, what I see happening is that there are some early sort of things that come up early in the discussion, and then those then trigger other people's responses, and then there's a long discussion, and then at the end of that discussion, everything before that may or may not be relevant because people have like, oh, I didn't really think of it this way. So at the end of the discussion, there may be more of a consensus or common ground around what people have decided or what people are thinking. So
I agree. But to respond to that, Todd, here's what I think we should do is in those pre-meetings, the Tuesday pre-meeting where you and I are meeting with Kailani and being, a lot of times that's my personal introduction to the project. So I think I was kind of poo-pooing those meetings as just like another commitment in my schedule. But I have never been as prepared to review one of our projects as I was today. Like, I understood this building because we spent an hour yesterday talking about this building. And actually, and I know there's some weird, attorney things where we're not allowed to do the review outside of the review, and I've always been a little nervous how many questions I can ask you, Kailani, outside of this forum. But we talked a lot to really understand, what are you guys concerned about here? Instead of us digesting your tasks during the meeting, it was all pre-digested. And I was trying to anyways step in and shortcut some shit and just be like, look, this is what we need to discuss on the north facade, because I'm very familiar with this comment.
And that was the intention of those meetings, is to really help kind of frame the criteria, what staff is, those priorities during that meeting, and kind of get those to where you're very familiar and you can help to manage the meeting or
Well, and I think to take-
help the good discussion.
So to take it one step further, Todd, and I hope this will alleviate, some of the confusion component. I think what we should make the goal out of those pre-meetings is, one, not only making sure we go through each of the task items that staff has presented and feel like we've asked enough questions to actually understand what their concern is. Not that we need to opine on it necessarily, but that we actually understand it. But then if there's opportunities to group some that we think would be relevant, and in this case, I would argue all 4 of them would have made it to one group, that might
Right.
create logical milestones for you, Todd, to say, hey, we identified A and C as awfully interdependent. So why don't we start with A, and then we're going to go to C, and then we're going to summarize those 2. And then we'll go to B and D and E and whatever. And if at the end, we want to say, hey, does anybody want to adjust a summary based on where we've resolved? We could debate that, but I think the time management is something that obviously we want, that we're working on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a work in progress and it's getting better. And I think that that's a really good idea and a great way to spend our agenda meeting is if you guys think 2 things go together and you want to bundle those, we can get that either organized on our PowerPoint in a way that kind of bundles them. And I think it'll help the structure of the discussion.
But I also think, Kailani, on staff's perspective to further kind of the process is, I guess if it's obvious that comments are related to each other, and I'm not saying that it always will be, but that they somehow just arrive as a single item.
I debated that. It felt like a lot of images and a lot of stuff under one bullet to try to get it all in there.
I totally get it.
But it was because they were all related. It was all related to that kind of north elevation, site design, wayfinding, circulation.
So
I
felt like you guys were easy on them compared to the one we reviewed last time. Like, I don't know if it's just because of the size of the building or whatever, but I would have thought you guys would have had, other than the north facade, I would have thought you guys would have had a lot of comments about, or at least a couple comments about just the sheer massiveness of these buildings and the lack of kind of articulation.
We have gone back and forth on those articulation on the massing where they have on some of them, they've dropped some of those. That was early on in the discussion, but right now, because the priority, when we talked about kind of focusing DAB's discussion on high priority items, this set of items were the hottest priority. They were the most kind of difficult to really move the discussion forward and the design forward on. But those are we'll still go through every single site review criteria. So Shannon will go through each one of those and she will talk, it was at planning board and speak to how they meet those. And they're in their second round of site review and they've been resolving a lot of issues like they had mentioned. They've been on trying to resolve the tree issue for months. So I feel like they've got some time still in their design that they're working on things. It's not like it's going to planning board next month type of thing.
Got it.
When I think what I was probably most worried about was I felt like the applicant knows what we're saying. They're getting it. But I really felt like that the minutes have to reflect what
they do,
what they're picking up from this discussion that have to be somehow reflected in the minutes. And at this point, I don't know who's taking the minutes, who's going to take the minutes.
Devin.
I think that's our boy Devin, dude.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
did you get all that, Devin?
Well, it's kind of what I thought, but I didn't want to put him on the spot by like, Devin, did you take the minutes?
Yep, that'll definitely be me. I've got him a draft down here, but I'll definitely have to do a little review for sure.
Do you feel like you were, I don't want to say keeping up with the discussion, but do you think you were getting the sort of the crux of what we were talking about?
In a bit, I don't really have much of an architectural background, but I was able to kind of like you folks did really break it down a little bit to where I was able to put it in a, I think as Rory mentioned, like in more layman's terms, as reflected in the notes.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely think it was communicated well, in that aspect.
Okay, because I was trying, that's what I was. So when we went, the first conversation around the first issue, I think was the most complicated. The other one seemed to be relatively more easy, but that first issue seemed more complicated. And there were a lot of points that people made, and I felt like I had a lot of them on paper, and I actually didn't want to go back and revisit all of these and try to summarize them in front of the applicant, because I thought
It's redundant.
it's redundant. Yeah, we're sort of just keeping them here. We can sort of take all this stuff and sort of kind of get it down to the nugget of what we're trying to say through a conversation. Like what is this point still relevant? Yes or no? What would a recommendation look like based on this point? And try to get it closer to recommendations, but I didn't want to put them through that. So I
it's
think
tricky.
redundancy in some ways was sort of necessary.
Well, I think what Kailani's point, like if I was an applicant, I guess it would depend on how tired I was, but generally I'd want to hear every bit of, because I'm going to look for any seam in that discussion that I could tear open in my response. You know what I mean? And I think Matt's, buzzer beater with the east or the west facade, basically acknowledging that it's not a landscape buffer, so don't bother treating it like one. I mean, we didn't really cover that with the applicant. So the fact that that's emerging as we're kind of boiling the brew, that would be helpful for them to understand that, like, we're not asking them to plant, grade, or increase the size of that buffer. They may just need to look at some architectural screening or architectural walls or something.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying, Kalani, is maybe they're fine going through that, but trying to take all of those points that people made and try to find what are the real nuggets in all those points, which then brings up more discussion.
Yeah, I think it's like any board meeting, this is their project. They're the applicant. They're going to want to hear the summary. At least, like they were saying, it's nice to give them the opportunity, though, to let their consultants go. Let the folks that they, that are being billed hourly. And maybe it's just the project manager and your architect, or, they're critical people, but
it makes sense. Yeah.
It's helpful to have them there so they can hear things like, don't treat that like a landscape. Because it wasn't discussed during the time they were there. And that would surprise them. They might look at that and go, wait, I didn't hear them talk about that. So I think we need to leave them the option to stay, and I would generally I would actually want at least one person from their team to be there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with you totally.
Devin's gonna be writing a bunch of architecture babble in his fucking notes.
Like, what am I writing?
I'm gonna comb through that shit because it's
Hey,
fun.
Devin, I think there's some good AI resources online to help you.
That is a really good point, actually.
Yeah. Just throw in a couple of our keywords.
When
and
you
then
figure it out, you can tell me too, because I'm still like.
Visual interest, bro. Just drop some visual interest.
Just write a visual interest interstitial space.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, it's so funny. I can't believe.
Devin, did you know what an exposed podium was?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Did you know what an exposed podium was?
No. No idea.
No
idea. It sounds worse than it is.
Yeah.
And then Rory explained it to me at our agenda meeting, and then I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then I looked at him like, what's wrong with them? They look fine to me.
Yes and no.
I get it, but I thought it was going to look like a retaining wall or something.
No, yeah, fair enough. I think, I think the issue is that they've got these, like an entire corner of this building is one material, and it's a huge block, floor to ceiling. And then the base windows, which are some random storefront, are sitting 4 or 5 feet above the ground. And it just looks like, somebody was,
Yeah.
jack-o'-lantern. It looks like a fucking jack-o'-lantern in some of those locations.
Don't
So
put that in the minutes, Devin.
Yeah,
Verbatim.
Okay, so
we haven't adjourned, have we?
No,
No.
we haven't. We're still
I have
recording.
one more board matter before we move to calendar check.
Okay.
And this may come up in the calendar check, but I don't know when we're going to meet the next time. And
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
We might, January, maybe a small project that's required to go to the DAB because it's in downtown. It's
Okay.
a facade renovation and it hits the dollar mark for
What
recording.
date would that be, Kalani?
It's going, it would be, the second Wednesday of the month, which would be the 11th.
Okay.
The 11th, January 11th.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe if they move forward, it's kind of
Yeah,
a little questionable right now.
right. So Rory is scheduled to go off the board, and I really don't want him to do that.
I would have thought sometimes you guys give me such a hard time. I figured you're ready for a little more space.
You're
No.
hitting your stride with this latest review.
I feel like I'm starting to hit stride a little bit. Yeah, it's been 5 years.
Has it been that long?
Yeah. Well, it will
Wow,
be.
my
It will be.
fast.
Yeah.
Well, 3 of
Yeah.
them were.
Yeah.
Are you going to reapply since we don't meet every month? Is it something you have this want to do?
No, I haven't actually thought about it. When's the actual date of renewal or whatever?
Devin,
Well,
do you know
last year
what-
the deadline was February 21st.
Oh, that's coming up.
Yeah,
The applications are not online yet though, right, Devin? Those
it
haven't
hasn't been
opened up?
announced.
Do I
I
actually have to
couldn't find it
reapply
online.
and go meet with city
Yes, you
council
do.
again and all that shit?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I figure, why not? These are they're fun now, not having to go in and sit there, being at the house and, cracking, you've got all your snacks available to you and
The bags of chips we used to have are
yeah, no, I dig it. I just like being aware of what's coming to town.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would miss the most is just not being able
Lauren
to.
told me that DAB was fun because you went out drinking afterwards, which I think we did once or twice, and then COVID hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, now it's just during.
So
no, yeah, I'll reapply.
Definitely do that.
Yeah, yes, of course. What else do I have to do on the second Wednesday of every month?
I'm trying to think, there was a word you used today that you used several times that you haven't used in the past that I know of. And I don't think I wrote it down.
Must have been good.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Podium?
It was a great word.
I think we did well today, but I also think we were guided appropriately by staff. I also
If
think it's
this-
just such a big building, dude. So
And
I'm
if
surprised.
this is working for you guys, if just identifying the most important issues is actually working. Obviously, we don't want to keep you from commenting on the other things, like you talked about some of the materials, the window patterns. But if this is a good format, we will continue to do it. If you'd like.
Matt, are you gonna stick around on BDAB?
Matt's locked in he just renewed.
I think I'm on the 5-year plan.
Really? You just renewed in 2022?
I don't.
Yeah, he had a short term.
Oh,
'cause he
you were
replaced
filling a
somebody.
gap. Yeah.
Yeah,
Todd's got you guys.
it's all running together. I'm going to try to go for a decade if they let me.
But here would be my one request, Kailani,
Okay.
is I would like to still have my end of term dinner and give my first of hopefully many historic framed paintings.
I have to see if we're still doing that. I don't.
Oh,
I
BS.
think
For Rory, you could do.
Dude,
Well, Rory, well, let me work something out on the painting.
I want a
the
historic
photos, the historic
photo,
photos
and I'd
from
love
the-
to maybe look at which options are available, and then
You
I'd
know,
love to
Cindy,
do a
Cindy
dinner.
picked those. She would pick them, you know, I never saw those. She would always go very quietly to the Historical Society and pick from our, you know, historic preservation group, have one printed and do all of it. So it was always a cool surprise. you
I
know,
would
and-
deeply appreciate that. And then is it cool from like, I mean, it's the end of a 5-year term, so I feel like a dinner celebration is warranted.
I
could
think so too.
definitely- Yeah.
Sweet.
So is Rory, you're the only one, I haven't looked at the timing. I think you might be the only member timing out this term.
Yeah,
Yes.
Rory is 23, I'm 24. Matthew was, I think, on a 2-year term, and then he came back in for 5, so he's in to
He's on the
like
10-year
29
plan.
at least.
Oh, no, Matthew, so it's, what it says here is Matthew's term is 21 to 26. Todd
Yeah.
is to 24, I'm to 23, and Brendan's to 25.
And we're hoping to have some folks, I know your friend Rory had wanted to apply, but unfortunately, he lives outside the city limits. and there's
Yeah.
not a
Makes sense
path
to me.
for it. But if anybody knows of anyone, or you're at an AIA chapter meeting or a ASLA chapter meeting, and you want to spread the word, please do. Planners too, if you know any planners that.
I would love to get an active practicing landscape architect on the board,
Yeah.
because that cat, you know, he's like a detailed landscape designer, right? So like, as far as having suggestions for landscape design elements, they would be less, you know, planter and and more like specific, which I think would be pretty cool, because they dig through images and precedents on the landscape side that, you know,
Yeah.
we've never really seen or cracked open.
I do like your guys' explanation of the landscape recommendation.
It's
It's like, some architectural lands.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Which-
And Asian inspired bubbles.
You're like, maybe some architectural landscape walls.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
was great. So yeah, that would be nice, especially on sites like this where, right, the site design and landscape really plays heavily into the whole building design too. So it's always nice to have someone that's got that specialty.
Yeah.
So if you know of anyone, we do have another open seat that we're also trying to recruit from. But Rory, as we get closer and they post the application online, I'll email you with the link and tell you, hey, it's up and now's a good time to reapply. And in the meantime, I will see about these historic frame photos and dinner.
That sounds amazing. It'd be an
Like
excuse for
the
us to get
fake
together.
going away.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like congratulations, you completed a term.
Yeah.
And it'd be an excuse for us to get together. I don't think we've all been in the same room or space in, 3 years. So
I would attend.
yes, Matthew would
Yeah.
come down from whatever mountain he's up at.
You met at the Rio, I think, for when
Yeah.
Jim was leaving.
That was like a week before we went into lockdown, right?
Yeah,
It was
No, we
even
did-
questionable at the Rio because I was sitting there thinking, do I need a mask?
I
like,
forget. My favorite
Yeah.
was we went to Corelli's, in
That
the
was-
Italian
yeah.
joint.
Yeah. We had
I
two
think you get to
people
pick,
retire.
don't you, Rory?
Yeah, I would hope so.
Look at
I've got a few ideas.
pictures, restaurants, all right.
Sweet guys, are we good? Can we convene?
We're
Are we,
good.
Yes,
Alright.
we've done the calendar check, so I think we're just to adjourn. So have a happy holiday.
Thank you, guys. And
And,
I'll let you
um,
know if you have a January project.
Okay,
Cool.
great.
Thanks, guys. Thank
Okay.
you,
Happy
Devin.
holidays.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Yeah, you too. Take care, Al.
Thanks, Devin.
Bye.
Bye.